We're live. Thank you. Welcome to the November 15th, 2021 Board of Directors meeting for MSAD 51. We will start tonight with a good and healthy recognition. I've asked some other board members to share in recognition, so it's not just me presenting these because I know everybody enjoys participating in recognition. So Peter, would you start us off?
Well, first of all, congratulations to Heather Gagan. Heather has been named High School Physical Education Teacher of the Year by the Maine Association for Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance. Heather has demonstrated a genuine commitment to improving the physical and emotional well-being of our students. She has had an extensive understanding of the continuum of motor skill development and how to support all students with their personal progress. Heather successfully engages family and community partners and is willing to put forth the extra effort necessary to bring quality programming to our students. She has recently developed several new curricular offerings that include unified PE in conjunction with our adapted PE program, paddle and racket sports in collaboration with Valhalla, and lifelong lifeguarding co-taught with our aquatics director. Heather is also a national board certified physical educator, representing a very small cohort of educators in our state to hold this certificate. Congratulations and well done.
Heather, we have a certificate for you. All right, I have the next one. All right, thank you, Peter. So second, we have congratulations to Becky Belmore for being selected the Maine Association of Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance, otherwise known as MAPHERD. There's so many acronyms. 2021 Distinguished Leadership Award. Becky is being recognized for her work as the Adapted Physical Education Representative on the MAPHERD Board of Directors and as an active member of the Maine Adapted Physical Education Task Force. Becky also served on the Maine Department of Education Health and Physical Education Standards Review Committee. Congratulations.
I have the next one. Don Gray will be accepting the award for the 2021 U.S. News and World Report, naming our GHS and GMS 6-8 school #1 school in Maine distinction. The U.S. News and World Report reviewed 17,857 high schools in the U.S. for this year's 2021 rankings. GHS was 490 in the U.S. The GHS was #1 in Maine out of 126 high schools that were reviewed. #1 in Maine for college readiness and curriculum breadth. #2 in Maine for reading and math proficiency. And 254th in U.S. for reading and math proficiency, which is great for our teachers, our administrators, and the students. So thank you for all that you do.
And I am lucky enough to get to honor Greely Middle School, who is also ranked #1 in the state of Maine. Out of 209 middle schools reviewed by U.S. News and World Report in the state, 122,000 in the U.S., we are ranked #1 in the state. Our reading and math proficiency scores at GMS are at the top. It's an incredible honor being named the #1 middle school in Maine by U.S. News and World Report, and Principal Mari Treblecock is here to accept the award. So, congratulations.
So as we mentioned last time we were together, we wanted to put some real emphasis on our recognition, and this was a great way to start. So thank you for everybody for taking the time out of your evening to be here for us to recognize you and for all the hard work that you've done last year, this year, all the time. So thank you again. Moving on to our next item, we have an approval of minutes. Do I have a motion for November 1st?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Jason?
Just one typo on 9E. My last name does not have an S on it, so you could amend that.
Okay, thank you.
As amended.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Thank you. And
abstain.
Abstain, thank you. Okay, then we'll move into public comment. Is there anyone here from the public that would like to speak this evening? Feel free to approach the podium.
Good evening. Familiar face for you. Jason Curry from the MSAD 51 Education Association and also from here at the high school. I wanted to give you an update on the progress of the debate team. Greely Debate participated in a remote tournament on Saturday, this last Saturday, and we took first place in the congressional debate category. Congratulations go to Madison Dalton, student member on the board, and Ruth Weeks for their high-ranking participation in the Student Senate, and also to Tucker Norwood and Meredith Brubaker for their very high-ranking participation in the Student Houses of Representatives. So Greely Debate plunges onward into our season, and we're looking forward to continuing to update you on us being a remarkable team in the state of Maine.
Thank you so much.
Hello, Ron Greco, community member, father of two young girls, 8th grade and 3rd grade. I didn't plan to come tonight, but upon picking up my daughter at her girls' basketball practice tonight, I was greeted with yet another example of the bigotry and the sexism that is rampant amongst MSAD 51, particularly with female student athletes. It's disturbed me for years. I've complained about it for years. I've commented on it for years, as have others. I know of other parents with student athletes that have been extremely close to filing Title IX lawsuits against the school because of this. And I got to be honest, I'm getting really close myself, even though I have a daughter that's only in 8th grade. So it's pretty much getting to be the beginning of her career in high school or school athletics. And it's already disturbing, the trends and the things that we see. She came out of practice tonight to let me know that the 7th grade boys had come in and they needed to leave practice because they needed the space for the gym. And she said, it's really odd, but it seems incredibly sexist to me that the 7th grade boys and the 8th grade boys get to have their own gym times and own practice slots, but the 7th grade girls and the 8th grade girls have to practice together. This is just in part of a larger trend that's been going on for years within the high school and down through. And I know I don't have time to go through all the examples tonight, but I will make sure to return from time to time to follow up and make sure that actions are being taken to start to address some of these issues. These are things that are not hidden in our community. It takes a simple walk into our high school gym in the middle of the basketball season to get a blatant example of how we feel about female athletes at this school when compared to their male counterparts. It's shameful to me that any of you have not seen this, have not taken the time to hold our administrative people here accountable for these things. This is 2021. This is not 1980. This is not pre-Title IX. As I look at the board, it's very diverse here in gender. There's no excuse for this, none whatsoever. And I hope that we can start to move forward as a community and treat our young women as they ought to be, equal to their male counterparts. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Tara Williams. I'm the parent of 2 MSAD 51 students and the executive director of the Maine Association for the Education of Young Children. And I'm here in both those capacities this evening to speak in light of potential district initiatives around, or for example, the new primary school and potential oversight of special education for young children. There are current early childhood opportunities and potential changes on the horizon. School districts may be charged with governance of 3- and 4-year-old special education in the near future. School districts have already been asked to help expand publicly funded pre-K and can receive grants to partner with childcare programs. Pending federal legislation could involve school districts being coordinators and fiscal agents of universal publicly funded preschool. When it comes to general and special education for preschool, there are 4 very important considerations to keep in mind. Number 1, during the first 5 years of life, children's healthy development is inextricably linked to their secure attachments with adults. Our youngest children need consistency in their care and education to be able to learn with as few transitions as possible. Going every day between multiple settings is not just less than ideal, it is actually, or can actually, be detrimental to their learning and development. Number 2, parents should be part of the process in deciding the best environment for their children's preschool education and care, including where they may receive special education services. Some young children benefit most from smaller family child care programs. Some thrive in child care centers, and some may learn best in an elementary school classroom. Number 3, every community in Maine has established places who have been educating and caring for preschool children for decades, who are the professionals and places of expertise in their town, and who should be partners in early childhood decisions that take place. And number 4, through no fault of their own, most school districts lack anyone in leadership or on their board with a background in early childhood education. This has not been the purview of public schools, and therefore it was not needed before, but it is now. So please make it a priority to hire or consult with someone with experience and training in early childhood education when you are making decisions that affect young children and families. Not one of the current or potential changes are directing school districts in Maine to serve all 3- and 4-year-olds in-house. Instead, our district is being asked to become an early childhood leader. This means understanding that many children will thrive when services and preschool programming comes to where they already are during the day. Early childhood leadership is community leadership, and so it will take innovation and new ways of thinking. To excel in early childhood systems is to be able to coordinate services among many partners and locations, and to collaborate more deeply with families. And I believe that MSAD 51 is up to the task and can be known for excellence in early childhood, just as we are in secondary education. So thank you all for your hard work, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. If we have written public comment like I wrote tonight, what is the best way to have that be part of the record of the meeting or the minutes?
You can email it to me and I can distribute it that way.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak this evening?
Good evening. Hannah Berry here, resident of Cumberland. Good to see you all again. I haven't been able to make it to as many meetings as I would like to, but today I made it a priority. I left everyone home, said fend for yourself. In normal fashion, I do not write my words down ahead of time. I speak best just kind of letting you hear my words as they come. And first and foremost, the number one thing on my mind was the email today declaring that we're going to get 2 snow days, but not the rest. So I'm just praying we only get 2 snowstorms because I don't want to be there for that 3rd one. I value tremendously the work that our district is doing. I value public education tremendously. Unfortunately, my experience the last 2 years as a citizen and a taxpayer has not been super positive. I've got a lot of kids in the district, 3. One I have pulled already because his needs were not being met. And that was sort of a joint decision. But the other 3 are still struggling. And I just ask that when you think about your policies, your programs, and all the wonderful work that you do, that you just think about being a kid and just not being on a screen all the time. So all of the hours spent checking Google Classroom, all of the time, they just need a little bit more of a break. And I say that after coming off of a 4-day weekend, but this morning they're all right back at it, like just dialed in. And they feel the pressure of a high-performing district, which I realize is important. However, I'm trying to stress to them the importance of a balanced lifestyle and that we do not all need to dial in and be so focused at such a young age. I just feel like they're missing out on a lot of the joys of childhood and adolescence. That being said, transitioning to the items for action, I was definitely overwhelmed here. I would love to hear more about those tonight, so I will hopefully stay as long as I can. And lastly, when it comes to the COVID response, I know we're doing great work trying to keep it out of the schools. I just stress again that if we could try to normalize that we are going to be living with this for a long time, forever. And I think that some people's mental health might improve if we could just relax a little, not about the specific policies we have to follow, but just relax a little about the level of intensity at which it's discussed at school. I just think it's starting to wear on the mental health of teenagers and the likes. So that's all for tonight. Thank you for your work, and enjoy your evening.
Thank you, Hannah. Anyone else like to speak? Okay. So we move into communications. We don't have anything listed here. However, I did want to make a mention that last Tuesday evening, our board here, the Town Council of Cumberland and the Select Board of North Yarmouth, including town managers Scott Poulin, Superintendent Jeff Porter, all met together. And we had a meeting that I think probably we will be doing more often, but talked about Cumberland's comprehensive plan. We talked about the school project. We talked about ways that we can collaborate with our budget, just to increase our working relationship so that projects that are coming down the line, especially with our new school, that we have a better working relationship. So I just wanted to share that. It was a very positive meeting, and I look forward to continuing those meetings soon. I believe that's all. Does anybody have anything? Go ahead, Jason.
Just very quickly, I wanted to share with the board in our never-ending quest for equity in the district and all the various books that I've read. I came across one recently. It's a new release, Woke Racism by John McWhorter. I encourage everybody to read it. It written by a black guy that shares the same concerns that I have about the approach that we are taking and potentially that they are not as helpful as we expect. So that's it, Woke Racism.
Can you say the author's last name again?
Woke Racism, John McWhorter. And to add on to that, some board members here have passed on other books that I am partway through and appreciate that. And I'm only 2/3 of the way through this one. But
Great. Thank you, Jason. Anyone else have anything to share? All right. So we will then move into communications, and we will first hear a presentations, and first hear a presentation from the Greely Climate Action Team. So you guys are welcome to head up to the podium, and we'll be able to see your presentation here as well as slide changes. What do you have it on? Your laptop? Dirk, you should be able to just present it right from your laptop and control it there. You might just have to ask Dirk where you're connecting to. Should be just AirPlay, yep.
Tyler, while they're doing that,
Please,
can I
that'd be
just jump in? Because I think there's some just really good public comment on everything we heard. Well, first, Jason, that's awesome about the debate team. Second, I think the point about pre-K, I'm obviously biased. Full transparency, that's my significantly better half. Tara is. But I think that's something, that issue is something we should take a lot of time and effort and look into, how we're dealing with pre-K, and not just regarding special education, but the whole plan regarding that. And so I think that's really good advice. Third, I agree with Hannah about the screen time piece. I think it's worth us giving some thought to how to lessen that. And then fourth, Ron, that was the first I've heard of a situation like that, but I'm horrified, and I would love to hear more. And I think that's it, that we should absolutely address an issue like that. That sounds terrible. So thank you for sharing that instance. I sure do.
Thank you, Mike. All right, I think we're good. Go ahead, guys.
All right. So we're a group of Greely students. We came together in February this year. We didn't really have a name. We just knew that we wanted to take action towards the climate in whatever form that took. So for Maine specifically, climate change is something we're constantly seeing. Data supports that our state's temperature is rising pretty rapidly, and it's something we should really get a handle on. Our Gulf is super in danger. Ocean acidification is rising at astronomical rates due to the carbon emissions, and the Gulf is getting a lot warmer. Maine's statewide annual temperature has increased 3.2 degrees since 1895, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it really, really takes a toll. And climate models project that Maine could warm an additional 2 to 10 degrees by 2100. Everything from Maine ecosystems, traditional Maine careers like lobstering and shellfishing, increasingly threatened by this issue. So the news has really never been grimmer. It was found by a recent survey by BBC News that nearly 60% of young people are regularly very worried and extremely worried about climate change. And we conducted our own survey at the high school just about the level of concern regarding climate change. And in our school, from those who responded, the majority of students are very concerned for our climate. We expected this, and we believe that climate change has a really very real effect on the mental well-being of an entire generation. Being regularly subjected to predictions of the failure of our ecosystem and having very little ways as minors to cause any real change kind of takes a pretty huge toll. So then from the data that we got from this other survey about how adults in the community are concerned, many students felt as if adults were not as concerned about the crisis as they themselves were. You could chalk it up to teenagers kind of disliking authority, but we see it as a legitimate concern from our student body. So matching this concern, we come here today to just kind of make a couple of requests for the board to consider. So we read through the Climate Action Plan, just kind of grasping an idea where the town intends to head in terms of sustainability. This plan had some key data that is fully in favor of an MSAD 51 solar farm. We know that MSAD 51 has agreed to go zero GHG by 2030, which is on page 5 of the Climate Action Plan, phase 1. The main question to this goal is being how. On a survey on possible sustainable energy options, seen here, securing renewable energy sources for the community was the third ranked option with the highest % extreme approval rating. So although it is number 3, it is the highest majority of residents to strongly agree to any of the items.
Hello. As well as positive public support, feedback from the student body was positive as well. We know the town has recently undergone a streetlight change to LED, which received high public approval. Annual electricity consumption was reduced by 69% from 137,000 to 42,000 kilowatt hours. Annual GHG emissions will consequently be reduced by an estimated 4% of the total town, and annual savings are expected to be around $34,500 per year for a project payback period of 4.5 years.
This example of a successful sustainability-based change is exactly what we as a town would be aiming for with this solar fields. Transferring MSAD 51 energy consumption into solar energy would not only contribute to a sustainable Cumberland and address concerns about our rapidly changing climate, but actually save money each year on electricity bills and be financially beneficial for our town. If we use 2015 as a baseline, MSAD 51 would make up 7% of Cumberland's emissions. However, with the MSAD 51's district expansions in recent years, with the Greely Center for Performing Arts, and most recently, new classrooms for Mabel I. Wilson and the Greely Middle School, the district most likely holds a much larger percentage of Cumberland's GHG emissions now. Amid new district developments, along with the support of the public and much of our student body, now would be the perfect time to incorporate a solar farm into your goal set.
When we met with Bill Shane back in May, he told us how great of a success the solar field on Drown Road was for our town. Not just from an environmental stance, but from an energy and cost-saving stance as well. He told us about the power purchase agreement that the town had set up and how it has saved our community money in the long run. Our request is that this board continues the work it has previously done in solarizing the MSAD 51 campus. There is no better time than the present, especially considering the urgency of the climate crisis. This action request on the screen is directly from an improved climate plan from our town. All that we want you to do is to continue the work that was put on hold. Mr. Porter has also made us aware that the district is planning on purchasing 76 acres for development. This could be considered as an option for a portion of the land used for the solar field. Clean energy and sustainable practices should be of importance in the construction and planning of the new buildings put in place here.
Our second request is we really want this board to commit to a climate resolution for our school system. Some suggestions from us are just kind of that we'd love for the board to recognize that climate change is a vital children's issue. Climate change should be taught in schools from elementary through high school. The board recognizes the root of climate change and their solutions. The board has a responsibility to minimize district greenhouse gas emissions and demonstrate leadership. The board has a responsibility to promote actionable solutions with students and community members as partners. It's really imperative that future generations know as much as possible of this crisis if we want to do anything about it. The more people that pass legislation and create policies towards bettering our climate, the better off we'll all be. That's all we have for you today. And if you want any of these sources, or we found a great resource for a climate resolution, we can send that over to you as well. That's all we have for you today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. I know you all have waited a long time to come, so I really appreciate your patience, but I do think that things happen for a reason, and I think your timing is really great right now. So I want to open it up to the board. Jason, anybody, just go. So then Mike.
Great job, guys. I share your concerns, and I think it's well justified. I encourage you to reach out to the town council and the select board and do a similar presentation to them in the towns. That's where potentially we could build policy that affects these things. Just last week, we put solar panels on my house, and it's kind of the right thing to do, but it's tremendously painful, financially speaking. But great job, guys, and I encourage you to keep pushing the right message forward, because you guys are certainly the ones that are going to feel it if we don't get this right. Good job.
Thank you.
Mike? And then Avery. Oh, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I think, doing whatever we can to reduce climate change is great. I also think that by incorporating it into the district, it sets a good tone. It shows, the upcoming adults how, solar, electric buses, all these different things can be incorporated into life to help reduce the role of climate change.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention setting an example for surrounding communities.
Yeah.
Yeah, just echoing, I deeply appreciate you using your voice, you putting in the time and effort into building a presentation and thinking it through and presenting to us. I think it's well-founded. I completely agree with Jason and Avery. I strongly support us not just exploring, but actually completing a solar project especially as part of our build-out. You mentioned electric school buses. There's more and more. I would encourage you to keep thinking big and pushing us hard. Just, again, for transparency, the issue of climate change is my professional work. I've worked on it for 15 years, and I will say if folks paid attention to what happened in Glasgow the last 2 weeks, the only reason why we got to a point where we are, and it's not perfect, is because of young people standing up and saying, not enough, not enough, not enough. And so I really appreciate you doing that, and I hope you'll continue. Yes.
Anyone else like to say something? I just want to say it's hard to go after all of that. I agree with what everyone has said, and I know you've been working on this, like I said, for a while. I appreciate that you were able to connect with those at the Cumberland Climate Action Team as well, and Denny Gaudet, I know that you have probably been in touch with these folks as well. So thank you. I want to say that thank you for holding us accountable and also giving real easy examples. I thought the example that you gave of the streetlights and how easy that was to understand, those simple actions make a big impact. So like Mike said, keep pushing us, keep holding us accountable. And I know that there's been a couple of times where I've been able to meet with you to talk about what would be helpful. I know Mike is still available for that support, so please don't hesitate to reach out and keep doing this. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, and now for our next presentation, we have Greely Goes Green update.
I just want to thank the students who came to present tonight. I had a chance to also, with Mr. Scott and the students, and I think it was Mr. Shove last spring, go down to the solar farm. It was really an interesting visit, and to actually visit a solar farm and to listen to the questions that were being asked. I think obviously young people have way better sense about this than we do, and a lot more information. And I do think it's something that should be seriously considered as we're looking at a new building project in this district. I would suggest that we hook the architects up with you folks and really get some more information and get information to the architects about what this could look like. I think it's a very worthy cause, and we certainly should be moving in that direction. So tonight I get to update you again on the Greely Goes Green plan, as I have since the beginning of the school year. I won't go through some of these slides. These are just routine reminders that we have many mitigation strategies that we have in place in the district, and that we use a lot of data and metrics when this update is put together every 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the board meeting. So this is all the data and metrics that we are using for these updates. We have 20 people who are on the Greely Goes Green think tank, which is the advisory group. We have almost 100% attendance at our meetings, and I just want to thank this advisory group for all of its great work. I mean, these are really high-level, deep discussions about topics that are of importance to many people. So for November 15th, the update, and I haven't put out, all the updates that I've done do not fit on this chart, so you only see 3 at this point, but the latest, November 15th, there's been no change in state guidance since the beginning of the school year. We've been told there might be new state guidance coming out midway through the school year at this point. Cumberland County transmission is still high. That has not changed since the beginning of the school year, so that's one of our data points. We have 34 COVID cases that are either active or are archived at this point in our district, which is more than double the last time I provided an update, which was on October 18th, about a month ago. We have more than triple the number of individuals exposed as a close contact or were tested positive for COVID. However, I think the really good news is, and this is something one of the doctors on our advisory group highlighted for us at our meeting is that the numbers are going in the right direction for our school community. And that is, even though the numbers of exposed people is up, the number of individuals being quarantined, the percentage is actually going down. And if you look at 36% of those individuals who are quarantined versus exposure on October 18th versus 21% now. And that really has a lot to do with vaccination status, pooled testing, and now that we know that younger students will start getting back or have started getting vaccinated, once they're fully vaccinated, I assume this number will even go down more. But it's just a testament to a lot of different things that are going on and that are giving us options so that students are not out of school as frequently as they could be if they were close contacts. Our pooled testing enrollment has been climbing since the time that we introduced pooled testing back in mid-September. So it's gone from 43% in mid-September to 60% now. We have 60% of our students across the district who are now enrolled in pooled testing. And we have not increased any positive pools since the last update, so we're still at 3 positive pools that have come back since we started pooled testing. That means that we're not detecting through our testing any new cases of COVID, but the 3 that we did detect, we're able to do the secondary testing and make sure that we were identifying anyone that was positive and taking precautions with the other students. So that's been helpful. So our monthly comparisons, these are the monthly updates that we give the Department of Education for staff. Our staff vaccination rates, which were required by the state now to report each month at the beginning of the month. You can see that the percentages in all of the areas have inched up slightly since my last update, or at least since October 1st, so we report those at the first of the month. So those percentages have all been steadily increasing the number of staff who are vaccinated in our district. Student vaccination data has also been going up. You can see it's a marked increase at the 6-8 level. We're just getting a lot more families providing that information to us. So we have 81% of our students now in 6-8 who are eligible to be vaccinated have now given us documentation that they are. And at the high school, again, I think 61% is low. I think it's higher than 61%. However, that's the amount of documentation that we have right now from families at 61%. But again, both are up from last time. So recommended adjustments, these are recommended adjustments based on the advisory group. And I did take their advice in all these areas, setting data benchmarks. So that really has to do with saying if there's a percentage, for example, of students who are vaccinated or staff that are vaccinated or a combination thereof, should we be relaxing certain standards? And the advisory group is saying no, not at this time for a variety of reasons. Removing the masking mandate and requirement at any of the levels, again, the advisory group is not recommending, and I'm not recommending that tonight. Parent volunteers, that topic came up at the meeting. We do have parent volunteers who are able to come in outside and work with classes, so the idea of parent volunteers coming indoors. The topic was brought up. There was a lot of discussion about this particular topic. The group advised that we revisit this in January, get some teacher input, and bring this back and put it on the agenda. Capacity limits for athletics and for the Art Center, it's right now at 50% capacity as we go into the winter season, which is about 600 people that would be in our gyms. And in this room, it would be about 250 people for seating capacity. The advisory group advised that we start with these percentages and then we can reassess if they need to adjust upwards. And look at those capacity limits again. So I'm also recommending that. These are administrative adjustments that were not brought to the advisory group and were just adjustments that I made in concert with other administrators. Music concerts and drama productions, the advisory group had set it at 25% was their advice. I upped it to 50% after the meeting because 25% was probably not going to provide the audience and it was really not necessary to keep it that low. So I put it up at 50%. And again, I just talked about bringing that back to the advisory group, which they asked that it stay at 50% for now and advised that we do that. Reviewing the procedure to require a doctor's note for return to school after being symptomatic. Most people know that we have added the negative PCR test as an option instead of going through your children's physician. It can be one or the other. It doesn't have to be just a doctor's note anymore if that doesn't work. And student teachers coming back in classrooms, that change was made also back in October. We're now, we'll be bringing student teachers back into classrooms starting at the mid-year mark. And we're treating student teachers as basically as staff members. So we'll be checking to make sure that they are complying with all of our other procedures. So the summary is that both student and staff vaccination rates have increased over the last month. Since my last update, pooled testing participation has increased from 54 to 60% over the last month. I want to thank all of our families who are participating in that. That is an added layer, and it's peace of mind for families, it's peace of mind for the school community. It's certainly private discussion with families as to whether or not they want their children enrolled in pooled testing. I would just encourage parents of younger students who are getting their children vaccinated that pooled testing shouldn't be one or the other, it should be both. And that's something that will encourage families to continue enrolling their children if they so wish to do so. Reported COVID cases have more than doubled during the last month, as I mentioned earlier. And even though we have more than triple the people who are exposed to COVID, the number of quarantines, the percentage of quarantines has been dropping, which is exactly the direction we wanted to see. So that's good. That means that we're keeping fewer kids out who are exposed for quarantines. And that's exactly what the point of all this is, keeping kids in school. The advisory group has largely advised to stay the course for now. Again, these updates come frequently, and I'll be updating you again not very long from now. And to continue messaging the importance of pooled testing, as I just mentioned, the advisory group gave 3 bullets of advice to families if they wanted to participate, continue participating, and knowing that it helps the collective safety of our school community. The value comes from increased numbers in pool testing, and that it's a weekly kind of peace of mind for families, classrooms, and the school community. Staying current, we have an FAQ, just reminding people we have an FAQ on our website. We have a new website, just changed over a week ago, but all this information is now right on the front. And you can click right at the top of the website, and that information will pop right up. And the entire unabridged version of the Greely Goes Green plan, which is the plan that's keeping us on the right track this year and continues to be updated, is also linked there and is on our website. The next advisory group meeting, they meet on December 14th, and then I'll have my next GGG update on the 20th of December. So that's the update for this meeting.
Thank you, Jeff. Open it up to the board for questions or any discussion. Jason? Nope. Tom?
So Jeff, I was wondering if there's an explanation for why we've had such a steep increase in the vaccination rate at the middle school, 6 or 8, and we haven't seen a similar increase at the high school.
I really think it probably just has to do with documentation and people getting that documentation to us. I can't think of another reason why that's happening. Sixth graders obviously are kind of more in the group with the younger kids, 5 to 11. So that might have increased a little bit, but we haven't had fully vaccinated 11-year-olds. It might be kids that have turned, 12 during a period of time, but it might have gotten fully vaccinated, but I don't think that would account for that percentage to change that much. I think it's just families giving us that documentation. I really think that's it.
And with the advisory group, has there been any discussion about how to incentivize that, particularly with the high school?
We did discuss it very briefly, I believe, at our last meeting, but there wasn't any real resolution on that except to try to get more kids to give us the information. The problem with the survey, putting a survey out, is that we already have students that have given us that stuff. We'll get duplicates of it again. And we're really looking for, again, that documentation. Some districts put a survey out to students and staff and then just take that information and that's what they're reporting. We've never done that. A lot of districts don't do that either. We were actually saying, please upload, your documentation so we know that it's actual, that we've got it.
Thanks.
Jennifer?
Thank you, Jeff, for your update. My question is around the PCR testing, and what I've heard lately from friends of mine is that has been increasing in time, and kids have been out of school that are not sick for a large amount of time. I would hope that our technology investment that we made last year, that kids are able to live stream their classes if they're out for 4 or 5 days because of this, because they have a sore throat or things like that. And I think that, I'm not sure how the better way of it is that, but you're going to have kids that are going to school sick and then leaving, and then other kids that are saying that they're sick and then have to miss a whole week of school. It's taking at least 1 to 2 days to get the test, and then it's taking 3 days to get the results. And if you hit it on a Monday, then the week is gone. And all this classroom time is so valuable to our students. I was going to say especially the high school, but really for anyone. And we have so much technology that it should be seamless that they can just jump in. And I hope that there's some focus to that, especially as we go into the winter and there's going to be more colds. And I think we want to encourage people to stay home if they do have a little bit of a cold and not just go and say they're fine behind the mask. And this kind of in between is really kind of making kids kind of separate into groups, or I'm not really sure what that is, but we need to kind of clarify that if we're going to stick to our guns on the PCR test. If there's a quicker test that we can do and we're fine with that, or some sort of documentation with it. I mean, as we all know, we go through a winter, we all have a runny nose and a sore throat every day. So I hope that, especially the technology, these kids need to be engaged, especially if I had a friend that her son was really just fine, and he could have been doing schoolwork, and he couldn't come to school, so.
Thank you, Jennifer. Jason?
So when we get to the action items later on, I'll be asking again to split out the mask portion and to move the verbiage to recommended and not mandated, but that's a little ways away. As far as the cases and exposure numbers, we have no ability, Jeff, to get hospitalization numbers. Is that right?
For our students, you mean?
For our specific students, yes.
I don't know how I can ask the nurses or our physician, but I don't believe we would be able to have access to that unless families gave us that information.
I would find that much more useful than cases and exposures, which to me are, well, less useful. As far as benchmarks go, I would encourage the advisory group to come up with benchmarks so that we don't just keep moving the goalposts. I mean, their advice or their recommendation was to not set benchmarks, but that doesn't move us forward. I mean, we've got to have a finish line here at some point that if we get to this spot, we can move towards normalcy. So I'd ask you to push the group towards that. What would warrant a change in the event capacity? So you changed it from 25 to 50%. What was that based on, and how would it change off from that 50% mark? What would determine that?
Yeah, the 25%, part of it, I'll be honest with you, I met with the music teachers in the district, and you know, they had told me that what 25% really means for people coming in to watch a concert was very low numbers. And the fact that we have a huge room that has appropriate HVAC and air filtering, and that there's a lot of venues that we're using far more capacity in, even for people that are not regularly in this space or in our schools. So the other thing is I just checked in with other districts, and quite frankly, what are they doing? And they were all at 50% or more for capacity. And looking at the space that we had for whether it's the gym or the GCA, it just made sense to increase it. Seemed like too low. We had gone a little bit too low on that one. So I just made an adjustment. But going beyond 50%, I felt like I needed a little bit more advice on that one. We are starting the winter season. And we've already started the concert season. We had a concert last week, and then we'll have many concerts coming up in the next month. So if we're going to increase, the percentage, I'd like to make sure that we do that in a way that makes sense. That I think that the music teachers right now have adjusted their concerts, so they have smaller venues of kids. So instead of putting the band and the choral concert groups together, they're separating them so they have fewer kids, which means fewer people coming to watch, which makes sense for the schedule going up to the holidays. For athletics, 50% is still, 600 people in a gym of, that can seat 1,200. Most of our events do not have that many, but as we go into the season, and certainly there's certain programs like basketball, which will draw, at least that many and usually more, usually a lot more. So the other piece is the MPA has once again weighed in on this. And just this week, or today I should say, the MPA has signaled they might be giving some decision on this. I'm interested in hearing more voices on the capacity limits and what makes sense. I think it's going to be very difficult and challenging at an athletic event to, say to people, I'm sorry, we've got 600 people in here, we need to shut the door. It's easier in this space, but I also want to be consistent. So if we're having trouble with the athletic area, we shouldn't be limiting in the art center either for concerts or any other events that occur in here. So I think I'm kind of at a crossroads in my own mind about capacity limits, and is this an opportunity in the next couple of weeks to either stay at 50% or start inching that up more? I'm keeping an open mind, and I'm going to keep using the advisor group for that purpose too.
I'd encourage you to draw up benchmarks now that maybe if we get to this point that we could do that. And if you just look at it as from a seating standpoint, every other seat, of course, that's 50%, but then you've got family units that come in that are sitting together. So I would think it would be reasonable that we could get to 60 or 70%, and that would be pretty easy to figure out, I would think. And
yeah, one other district that I was looking at, they did do a limitation of 4 seats per family unit. And then there had to be a seat between a family unit and the next family unit.
Yep.
Either behind or beside, or however it worked with the aisles. So there was an actual percentage. It was based on, look at the number of seats. Every student gets 4 seats. That was just how they determined it. And then there had to be a seat between. And that's how they came up with the math. So yeah. That just means that you don't set limits. You looks at the number of kids that you've got in that concert, and then however many family members you can bring in the space that you've got. So that might be another way that we can approach this.
Yep. Well, I think that would be easy to lay out in that fashion. Maximum number of people together, a space, maximum number of people together. Yeah. I would push for that, anything to get back towards normalcy. I had a family reach out to me frustrated with their situation recently with the quarantines, and their kid specifically has asthma, which creates an issue where they know it's just asthma symptoms, but they're trying to be good citizens and follow the rules, and so they go down this list, and now they got to keep the kid home. They know it's not COVID, but they have to keep the kid home, and then they have to get a doctor's note, or they have to get a PCR test. So now I guess you don't need a doctor's note, you can just have a PCR test, but their complaint about that was that it was 2 or 3 or 4 days to get that result. So I would ask, can we accept the Binax test so that kids like that can get back to school quicker?
So Dr. Shaw, who met with the superintendents 2 weeks ago, there was a question asked, exactly that question. Can we accept a Binax antigen test? Can we accept home tests? And the answer was no, you shouldn't be accepting either. And so that's the advice that we have continued to go on in our district. We checked with Yarmouth, we're doing exactly what they're doing right now. I believe Falmouth is doing exactly what we're doing too. I think we're all doing the same thing, which is either doctor's note or PCR. We were off by not allowing the PCR option. And so I think we need to get back, kind of get into line with other districts and how they were doing that. I think, I don't know, I don't want to comment on that particular family, but in a situation where there's a chronic medical issue, we know where it's coming from, I would hope that the family would work with the school nurse to get a doctor's note that's on file saying, look, and the doctor's office is working with the school nurse saying, look, this is a chronic condition, and you shouldn't have to get a test every time. Again, not knowing the specifics of this particular case, but I think that makes sense to me, if we already know that there's a condition.
I'll forward it to you. As you can imagine, they reached out to me because they were frustrated. So I'll pass it on to you. Just a couple more things. I did hear from the advisory group and the nurses in there that of all the pooled testing that we've done, hundreds of pools, we've only had 3 positive tests come out of that. So you made the point of peace of mind, which of course peace of mind is important. That's a big part of what's going on here. But I think it's just sort of interesting to note that all the efforts and all the angst and everything we're going through has only resulted in 3 positive tests. And then, not to put you on the spot, I know we've discussed this over email, but could you reiterate what the expectation is as far as teachers in the classroom and their rights, if you will, to ask students about their vaccination status or their intent to get vaccinated?
Yep, nobody should be asking a student's vaccination status or a staff member's vaccination status. That's private information. The only time that it comes into play is if we have that information from families, and it's the school nurse working through close contacts, and we have that information on file, and then a nurse can also check the registry if needed to make sure we're not quarantining kids unnecessarily. But that's the only time that any vaccination should be, or vaccination status should be discussed, and that's a private matter between, the nurse and the family, and making sure that we're not quarantining kids. But for teachers or staff members to ask students or ask each other who's vaccinated, we can't do that.
Good. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Jason. Mike?
Yeah, harping on one point just a little bit, and I don't claim to know more than the Maine CDC, but I hope that maybe by January so that once kids are vaccinated, that if a kid is vaccinated and then a vaccination plus a Binax test plus a mask, hopefully that can mean that they're in school. That really should be the case. I mentioned Glasgow before. It was the Global Climate Conference. I have a number of colleagues who were there. There was more than 10,000 people. They were doing daily tests every day. And so if it works there, we should hopefully start to move to a process like that for here so we can keep as many kids as possible in school and not have to go through the process of a PCR test.
Yeah, I personally don't disagree. I think a Binax test is acceptable in my mind. However, I'm not the one setting the standard operating procedure for the state, which is what we operate off of. We were told by Dr. Shaw, though, 2 weeks ago at this meeting that we had, that there will be updates to the SOP, standard operating procedure, mid-year. He said they will be favorable for people so that we're keeping more people in school. So I'm hoping that that changes, but I am not the person to make that change or to recommend it.
well, when you have an audience with Dr. Shah again, you can share that members of your community are pushing and making these.
He did hear that from,
Yeah.
from many people, actually.
Okay.
He's aware of it.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any comments? Kevin?
Thank you. I appreciate the update, Jeff. A couple things. You know, I am happy at the outcome that we were targeting, which was to have people in the classroom, in the gym, in the theater, fields, and of course, most importantly, the pool, a number of different places, and we've been doing that. I think Jennifer made a great point in using the technology that we spent so much for. If we have instances where people are out, if they're quarantining or really any other reason, that ability to use the technology that we have to stream really does give us a competitive advantage, and certainly the family's an advantage. You know, as much as I look at these numbers, and I guess I have the chicken and egg thing based on something that Jason said, talking about, you know, we spend a lot of time looking for 3 people within the pools, and I think that the protective measures that we try to put in place and the awareness may keep us at 3, and we confirm that. So I see it as, yeah, we spent a lot to find 3 people, but maybe our practices are giving us only 3 people, so I really see that bifurcated. A question for you, though, so I can stop rambling. Our authority versus DOE's authority versus Maine CDC's authority to do what we want in this district. If we removed all guidelines as a board and said tomorrow nobody wears any masks and we're at 100% capacity, what would happen to us?
That is the question that I think has been asked 100 times since this whole thing started, honestly, is where does our, you know, ability end to, you know, where's the board ability to kind of set those parameters? Where does the state come in and whatnot? So that's been moving for 2 years, and that's been a contentious item for 2 years. The standard operating procedure, the SOP, we're expected to follow it. We can follow it more strictly than it's in place, and that comes from the Maine CDC, and the Maine Department of Education then gives it to us through them, which means we have to adhere to it. Masks are recommended, so a board in Maine can say no masks. That's totally fine. That's not in the SOP as a requirement. Okay. The way that we close contact, trace, and quarantine, that is not something that we have the ability to set here. There was some leniency with the PCR test, and so we were a little bit stricter than the SOP in that area. So we're basically in alignment now with the SOP. Okay.
Is the health team unanimous in their decisions?
No, and the advisory group is not really voting on any of this. They're advising. Okay. And often on topics they're discussing. There's a lot of discussion, and then there's some sort of a general summary or feeling from the group. This is the advice that we're giving, and that's the advice that I take forward. So I wouldn't say it's unanimous.
Has the group ever wavered one way or the other on making masks optional?
I wouldn't say they've wavered. The only place that they might have thought of or questioned it is at the high school level. But that was closer to the beginning of the year that came up. And that was an area where there was more discussion. You know, if students are vaccinated, fully vaccinated, and there's a percentage of kids that are fully vaccinated, shouldn't we be advising that some measures like masking could be removed? And I will say that we have, 4 medical doctors on the group. None of them thought that was a good idea at this point, considering the community transmission that hasn't gone from high to even moderate during this time. And then the other, areas such as transmission cases that we've got in our district, all the data points, but the community transmission is the one I kept hearing. You can't isolate a school community from the entire community. Okay. But no, that's the only area there was some gray or some discussion, I should say.
That piece, just the last thing, is looking in areas in districts around us where some recently have been at that point where they've had to go back to virtual. And and I know none of us want to be there. That's the only thing. I always knew growing up, and probably similar to many of us on here, that when you deviate from that path that made sense, that was when you were going to get into trouble. And if our outcome, because I always did, if our outcome is to keep people here, if that's what we're driving toward, I think that we have to continue to look at all those things that give us an advantage, and the soonest that we can, and the soonest that you can get a recommendation. I think optional in the schools where people are able to be vaccinated has to be paramount to the effort.
I agree, and it is hard, I mean, every meeting to come and say, look, we're going to be wearing masks until the next update or whatnot, or it's a recommendation. Coming out of it, I think we all want to, that's like the first thing I think people want to get off their faces are the masks all day. And I think many of us thought by now, this might have been a possibility. But I agree with you, Kevin, completely that, we are seeing schools where they're deviating from the script in whatever way. There was a school in Maine that is shut down right now, or a district that's shut down. They're not doing pool testing. They have no alternative mitigation measures that they can go to. So whenever they're, kids are quarantined in large groups. And thankfully, we have not, for the most part, had to do that. We'll have, we had a case at GMS, 2 weeks ago, 88 students were close contacts, and I think we only quarantined, there was less than 5 students at the end of the day. So I think those are the things that we've been trying to put in place to reduce, the likelihood that kids are going to be out of school because of some exposure in school. So this is a different year than last year in that case. I want to be careful, that we're not just taking things away, but there's also a long list of things that I could also remind the board and the public of that we've moved ahead with and made changes since the beginning of the school year. So there have been a lot of things that we started the school year off saying, no, we're not going to do that yet. And there's about 10 things now that we've relaxed and opened up since then. And I think, so I feel like we're moving in that, and maybe I need to recap that more or talk about that more in these updates. Just kind of add it to the list of things that we keep moving ahead with because there's a lot more than just the masking, but I do understand your point.
Peter, and then Jason?
So what, sorry.
Peter,
sorry.
Just a couple things. Just as long as the reported high school rate is 61%, and it may be more, I don't have any warm, fuzzy feeling about doing anything about masks, especially I know in Cumberland County, vaccination rates are up, but still people are traveling around the state. State cases continue to go up, and until the parents start reporting accurate vaccination things, I'll continue to say it's totally irresponsible for the board to do anything on the maskings. Now, to follow up on Jason's thing on the on benchmarks, I mean, this stuff ain't rocket science. I would imagine that within other school districts, either in Maine or around the country, that there's probably a combination of vaccination rate, positivity rate within the community, and 2 or 3 other factors. And so I would imagine that there are benchmarks out there already that people are using. So this isn't something where we've got to get the Mayo Clinic or Mass General Hospital to come up with this stuff, but it's got to be out there somewhere. So I think we can, I think by December, somebody needs to do some research so that we have some statistics as to what those standards could be, because I don't want to see the can kicked down either, nor the parents. So we've we do need to start getting off the dime on what the standards are.
I have heard that a couple times now, so I'm going to make sure that there are, some criteria or benchmarks that are developed by the advisory group, even if they're not implemented, at least they can be developed.
If I can just say one thing, Jason, then I'll hand it over to you. But in regards to what you're saying, Peter, about benchmarks, I was kind of thinking the same thing in our last advisory meeting. And one of the first benchmarks, whether we want to call it or not, is community transmission. Mm-hmm. And that really is our first benchmark. And knowing that has not changed, if anything, it's gotten worse. Mm-hmm. We can all say it's not a benchmark, but it is. Yeah. And I think vaccination rates are also a benchmark.
Right.
And so I think we need to just work with the advisory team on figuring out a better way to present those, because we know we're all looking at those every time we revisit this. Jason.
So to that point, vaccination rates are going up and community transmission's going up. Is that right? In general?
Correct. I know that makes no logical sense. I can see it in your eyes, but that's the information I read as well.
Yeah. So there is one place still, the mask, where we're more restrictive than the state, right? We say mandated and the state says recommended. So what would happen, technically speaking, if we change that to a recommendation, not a mandate? How would that change?
That is completely up to the board to make that decision if that's what you choose to do. Mm-hmm. There's nothing that says you can't.
I mean, of course, we can't tell people not to wear a mask, but my suspicion is more than half the high school would still be masked, and it might be a good test to see what happens, because to Avery's point from a couple of weeks ago, the kids are together outside of school always anyway. I don't think it's going to move the numbers. So to move things towards normalcy is what I would advocate for. And then why aren't we voting on the recommendation of the GGG plan? Should we not be doing that each time?
That's a good point. That really should have been, on here, and I had thought of that too while we were going through this. The board can add that to it should be on every agenda. I apologize that it's not.
I mean, there's so many from policy that I have a feeling it just
if there's no changes,
just fell through the cracks.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you.
I wanted to just add to Jennifer's point that I feel like I didn't add to earlier about the technology. I am going to bring this up to the leadership team, because we do have teachers that are using, whether it's live streaming equipment or they're using their computer, and there's a student that's out and they're getting the student into the classroom. We do have teachers that are doing that. We also have teachers that aren't. So I'd like to talk about a little more consistency, because you're right, we're going to have more and more students that are out for just illness. And how are we going to handle that? Our red plan addresses a lot of that, but it doesn't really talk about the technology, using technology consistently.
And I think with that, Jeff, is that students are still having a really hard time hearing the teachers through the mask. And I'm not sure that, I think we've lost our way in making sure that it's still projecting and that kids can hear them in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And I've heard a lot of feedback that it's, I don't know if Avery wants to speak to that it's very difficult for kids to follow along and to be engaged during so whether it's live streaming so they can see it that way, or I know last year they were wearing a mic, but I really think that we should focus on that too. Go ahead, Avery.
Yeah, so my thoughts on it is if there are, any mask restrictions to come off first, then it should be the teachers. Make it optional for the teachers, especially with things like Spanish or French. There's a lot of pronunciation that goes on when speaking a different language. And there's a lot that you gain from seeing someone's mouth. And, even in other classes like social studies or like math, there's a lot that you take from someone's face. And I think it would be very beneficial to look at making masking optional for teachers.
Thank you. I see Mr. Curry's at the podium. Did you want to share something?
Thank you. I know this isn't public comment, and I appreciate your recognition here. I do want to make two brief points. Number one, I would like to remind the district that you are employers, and the responsibility for the health and safety and welfare of your employees is a paramount duty and obligation that you have. And I have to say that teachers in our 50s, which I qualify for now, teachers in our 60s, which one of my very best friends at the high school qualifies for, are at higher risk, especially if students are suddenly optional with masking at the high school. The risks involved, it almost seems like you're just rolling the dice with the health and welfare of the employees at that point. I would seriously caution you regarding that, and I know hundreds of employees would as well. Also, my second point is that if masking is optional at the high school for students, I would remind you, I teach psychology at the high school, and one of the things that's fairly recent, over the last 30 years or so, development in our studies of the human brain, is that the human brain doesn't fully really understand the consequences of an individual's actions until it's fully developed in its 20s. A person doesn't understand until they're 24, 25, 26, depending on the individual, the full implications of a lot of their actions. And masking could be a really great example of someone that we feel looks like an adult, but doesn't really understand the consequences of having the option and choosing not to be masked at school. Even if they're vaccinated, we know that vaccination, while it really limits the harshest effects and limits the mortality rate, it isn't a complete immunity to getting COVID. And so if we allow students to have the discretion to be masked or not, they can still spread COVID. COVID can still go all throughout, as we can see from rates going up at the same time that vaccination's going up. It's not a complete immunity to getting COVID. It's simply a decrease in the likelihood of being on ventilators, being on life support, and of dying of it. So, two factors to consider, perhaps. Thank you.
Thank you. Vanessa.
I would be amiss if I did not mention this, but volunteers in the classroom, if we can come up with a creative way, like just the students' parents in that classroom to volunteer in the classroom so they're not bouncing around, something like that to move that timeline a little bit earlier. I think the next meeting was December 14th. And just like a, yes, volunteers can go back in the classroom, as Jeff and I heard today from our community partners, the PTO and Foundation 51, they're really wanting to get back in the classroom to volunteer. And I know we're opening up the gym, the art museum, but I feel like this is a piece that's kind of getting dropped and not paid as much attention as it should. And I am passionate about volunteering, but I think it's something that brings the community a little bit closer together in that.
So we had a really good conversation about volunteering, and one of the things that came up during that is the different ways that educators use volunteers. And so there may be some classes that use them, and there may be some that don't.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that came up was that. Another thing that came up was the concern of managing volunteers and who was going to do that. Knowing that everybody's a little spent and taxed for their time. And then the other was just kind of the concern of health and safety and what that feels like for our staff. So it was definitely a good conversation. I know it's kind of like we could use them last week, but there's a lot of pieces to it that I think came up. And also having our teachers part of the conversation to figure out what the best place is. And it was really focused on MIW.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I just feel like we're opening up the art center, we're opening up the basketball courts. Everyone's going out, going to dinners, we're getting back to normal, but we're not able to go into a classroom where a teacher may need just one parent. Right. And I'm sure a volunteer would easily say, I'm vaccinated. So I just think the fear, it's a disconnect. We're gonna open up this to 50%, we're gonna open up the basketball court. We can't open up volunteers. Like, there's a huge disconnect here.
Yeah, I think one of the good things about having these updates regularly is that all this discussion is happening all the time now. You know, we're talking about all these topics openly and in public. I think volunteers is one that we can solve. And I think it's one that we can bring back volunteers. I don't think we're quite there yet, but I do believe we can do that, in not very long from now.
Yeah.
We do want to, like Tyler mentioned, one of the big things out of the advisory group, I think it was number one really, was let's hear from the teachers first. Let's find out what they really would like and what they need right now in the classroom. In any typical year, forget the pandemic, there are teachers that, have many volunteers in their room at the elementary level, other teachers that don't, have as much need for a volunteer in their classroom for whatever reason. They just have a different style or whatnot. So it just depends. Depends on the year, sometimes a group of kids or whatnot, so.
Okay.
But it is definitely on the advisory group's list, so, of things to keep dealing with.
The other question I had before we move on, unless anybody else has anything else they'd like to share, okay, is when will we start asking for vaccination information for 5 to 11-year-olds?
We already we actually got an inquiry, I think, last week about from parents, when are you going to get that information? But I'll make sure that we start talking about that more formally.
Yeah, I would assume the same ways that we've been asking for the higher grades, we would be doing the same. And hopefully within our next update, we would have some information on our younger students' vaccination rates.
Good point.
Related to that, the clinic happening Wednesday, very excited for that. I waited till my kids left to say that. Are you going to be collecting data from that just directly, like this person got vaccinated, check, we have that?
Yeah, we did that last year too when we held our own clinic. Problem is that the majority of the students will not get their vaccinations from us. We actually had some sign up and they got their first shot somewhere else, at their doctor's office, Walgreens, wherever. So it doesn't give us really all the full information. We just need to ask families to get it. But we definitely use the clinic data and then we go from there. That's what we did last year. Yep.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for the discussion. Again, we will talk about this every meeting. But for now, we will move on. So, Jeff, again, North Yarmouth property introduction before we move into our workshop.
So this will be a briefer, I think, discussion. This is just introducing, the board to the property that you are under option agreement at this point that you approved at the last meeting. We're talking about the idea of now 2 campuses and 1 school community. People have asked us for the actual address. We've had people emailing, calling, saying they want to eyeball it. The address is 80 Gray Road in North Yarmouth. And that these pictures have all been taken by either myself or others. Tyler took some pictures as well, and so you see those in this presentation. But again, this is a fairly large piece of property. This all aligns, just as a reminder, to the strategic plan. Believe it or not, that thing is still around. Early childhood education, the critical building block, and this has been in the tickler for over 3 years now. A strategic priority around making sure that our pre-K-5 facilities are the facilities that work best for our students in the long-term planning for our district. And again, just a reminder more than anything, this is our enrollment trending and going all the way from 2009 when the first 2 studies were completed, showing a decrease in enrollment to where you can see the enrollment starting to level off the actual enrollment, which is the gray line, and then the yellow line, which is the beginning of the projections, from 2016. Those projections were updated in 2019, and I believe by the end of this week, again, I've been communicating with Rebecca Wandell frequently in the last few days, who is doing our numbers, and she did the original 2016 and the 2019 numbers as well. She believes she can have us that data by the end of this week. So I'll be able to hopefully share that as soon as I get it. And again, these are projections that were from the 2019 study, which showed about 600 more students in the district, enrolling in the district by the year 2029. So just a quick reminder, we've gone through 3 iterations. Plan number 1 was the North Yarmouth Village Plan from 2019-20. There were concerns about that site, which was located behind the current North Yarmouth Community Center, about the proximity of the school to the aqueduct, traffic, congestion in the village center. And then we also had that wonderful COVID that hit just as we were kind of putting all the pieces together, which ended up in a 6-month kind of moratorium on the idea of pursuing anything based on COVID. And so plan number 1 was abandoned at that point. Phase 2, or plan 2, was the board, as you know, approved back in 2020, about a year ago, 2.5 acres of land abutting the campus that was under option agreement and just expired a few days ago. But the biggest obstacle after design was created was the Department of Transportation told the town of Cumberland that it would require a lot of infrastructure changes on Main Street and Tuttle Road. Those were things that we did not find out until after the design. Sometimes you don't know until after design is created what exactly is going to be the issue. And so at the end of the day, these are things that could have been overcome. The first plan we could have overcome working with the Water District, I believe. That's my opinion. But I think sometimes it's better things come along. I guess we'll put it that way. And so there was a lot of uphill concerns here, enough to say, is this worth it? And the other big concern was expandability of this plan. Basically, we were building out on the 2.5 acres of land that would have been purchased under that option agreement, and we wouldn't have had another place to go for expansion. So introducing Plan 3, which, as you know, the board, you approved this at the last meeting, an option agreement with Ben Grover at 80 Gray Road, which is just under 77 acres. So this is in the Village Center District in North Yarmouth. Site distance is already fine on Gray Road in terms of traffic going in and out of the site. Scott Poulin, myself, and basically the team from Oak Point, the entire team from Oak Point, we met with them, what was it, Friday? Went out to the site, met with them Friday, and walked up through the forest from the Gray Road all the way over the hill and down. It sounds like going to grandmother's house. It was a nice little trek through the woods to see where the proposed road would go. And it did make sense after looking at where the access road would go in there. Cost-effective turning lanes. So a lot of this stuff is already in place where we've had concerns about congestion, traffic, coming in and out of a site. A lot of these things had already been taken care of. I'd like to thank Mr. Grover for having a lot of these tests and studies already completed by the time the option agreement was signed. So additional soil tests are being completed right now, but there are some initial soil tests that Mr. Grover had completed. 3-phase power is very important. Natural gas transmission, that is in the works. There's a meeting that I know is being held just to make sure that the natural gas transmission moves ahead more quickly. And the Water District, the Yarmouth Water District, is fully on board with this site in terms of serving the school and making sure that there's water that would be in play near the site. So a lot of the things that we've run into in the past have already been reviewed, and our architects are feeling very confident that any obstacles at this point, or any big obstacles anyway, have been cleared, which is an important factor here. So this is a photo of Mr. Grover's in the middle with Tyler and with Peter. Just on the site a couple of weeks ago, right after the option agreement was signed, Ben met with Scott and myself and Tyler and Peter just to kind of show us the property boundaries and just kind of give a quick lay of the land and make sure that we understood where the property was and where it was going. These are some aerial photographs as well that we were able to acquire of the property. So some of the property is in the field that you can see, but the vast majority obviously is to the left of this field. So the vast majority of this almost 77 acres is to the left. And here's more of that 77 acres to the left of that field, as you can see. Just basically a lot of trees. These photos right here are coming off a field and going through the woods that would go to the proposed access road that would wind down over a hill and onto Gray Road. And the grading wasn't, I thought the grading was going to be steep, and it was about 5 or 6%, Scott, would you say? I think that's what Oak Point told us. It wasn't as steep as we thought, and they thought it was very, very doable for an access road. Some other photos, again, coming over the hill, looking down on the field, where the school would be the most likely places to put it in a field that's already cleared. I think questions need to be looked at as to the exact location of where the school would be, and any more clearing of trees that would go in there. Excuse me. Just additional photos. There's another aerial photo, really, of the acreage itself. And that's, again, to the left of the clearing of the field. So you kind of get an idea of the expanse of the land. So tonight, I know right after this, the board will be going into workshop. The facilities committee has already discussed 5 different options, and I know Peter will be talking about that in a few minutes. And the committee did narrow it down to 2 preferences, I should say. And again, Peter will talk about this. But pre-K to 2 or a 2-5 building in North Yarmouth, again, the board can discuss all of the options and not limit it to 2, but these were the 2 that the facilities committee discussed last week and leaned on as preferences. So the concept design, after the grade spans, there's some direction from the board on the grade span. Oak Point will begin immediately developing a concept design that will then come back to the board in concert with facilities committee, the staff that are the applicable staff involved. Pretty much the same process that was used during the last concept design phase. So we hope that this concept design will be completed, at least in the ability to share it out by April, if not sooner. And then, again, this is all assuming, and this is all a board decision, for a June 2022 tentative referendum to be decided at a later point. And finally, this is a schedule of major points to get to referendum. This doesn't include all the statutory steps that we have to take, but it's more the public process that we would be taking. You can already see 5 of them are already green, which means they're completed, and we're up to the first yellow, which is tonight, where the board discusses the grade spans and goes from there.
Great. Thank you. So we're going to try and maybe put a few of us in front. We're not going to, this is going to be on camera, so it's a little different than we've done workshops in the past, but a lot of times we've done our workshops at like 9:30 at night, and it's hard to think a lot about these big decisions then, so we figured we'd put it in the middle. So what I'd like to do is just maybe try to make a horseshoe that the camera can still see us. I know we have Julie and Susie joining us. Is Dawn joining us? Dawn, you're not joining us.
Dawn wants to, but Dawn.
I didn't think so. So we'll grab some chairs, and our mics can come off of here, so we can grab a mic and pass it around, or we can move tables like Avery.
There's a real great way to do this. So we can all see.
That's what I was just thinking. Oh, I hate looking down through all of that. Watch this. Now's the time. Pull something.
front. We just don't want to put our backs to the screen. That's the only thing. Just so we can kind of all see each other.
Is this okay?
That looks great.
I'll join over here.
All right, Peter. You want to guide us?
Well, I don't have, do we have the
Jeff's
cheat?
going to put up the option chart that you're
Yeah.
looking at.
Well, suffice to say that the Facilities Committee met. We also had two representatives from Oak Point. Susie Robbins was there, Don Foster, Jeff, and Scott. And we actually had just a very open discussion of the five different options, and we really went back and forth. It was just a very open mind discussion, and I think, I think several of us changed our minds a lot based on kind of the new information and input from everybody. So it was a very open discussion. But the end of the day, we had two recommendations that we came to the board, and the first one was option 4, where we would have PK through 1 at Mabel Wilson, 2 to 5 at the new North Yarmouth School, 6 to 8 at the middle school, and 9 to 12, no changes. Again, the educational values, and we'll do this for the public, was keeping the 5th grade in the elementary setting, keep 6 to 8 as a middle level, and keeps folks from bouncing back between the towns at an elementary level. We could build a new elementary school with a new structure in mind. This is the least expensive option, is that we would not have to build onto Wilson, and also that it would cause the least disruption during construction. And then option 5 was pre-K to 2 at the new North Yarmouth site with about 650 to 700. Grades 3 to 5 would be in Mabel Wilson, and then the same 6, 8, and 9, 12 in the middle school. It would be a smaller size primary school, plenty of play space, school configuration matches main learning results. It's a good use of facility space and future capacity, and but we would have to add the proverbial number of classrooms onto Wilson to accomplish this. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, where we are. I think we were kind of leaning toward option 4, but we want to throw this out to the board to see where we are. And I guess at this point, Tyler, with the discussion?
Absolutely. We'll go around and give everybody a chance to ask questions, and please utilize Susie and Julie while they are here. There's a lot of pieces that go into this, so I think it's hard to just talk about it in one way, so that's why we're having a workshop. So maybe what we should do is start with option 4 and kind of discuss that, and then we can move on to option 5, unless there's a strong feeling towards another option that wasn't presented as a recommendation from the facilities committee.
I just have one question. I do have that's not strong, but just the question. Number 2, what would be the reasoning? Because I don't believe you'd have to build Mabel I. Wilson up. Is it because it'd be a large primary school?
Yeah, I don't want to speak for anyone else on the committee, but I think that was the biggest concern, if I remember from our conversation, is just the number of students that would be in a pre-K to grade 3 school. We have a pre-K to grade 3 school right now, and then with projections add on to that. And we're talking about a school that would be, anywhere from, in projections, 850 to 900 students, I would think. Depends on what Rebecca's new numbers come back at. But we're talking about a very large primary school.
Okay, because it doesn't seem like option 2 and option 4 in the projection size of students is different. The new school, 2 to 5, you have 800 to 850, whereas option 2 is 850 to, so it's 50 more students. So I was just kind of curious on how they landed on 4, not 2, keeping 4 or 5 together. You have still that same principal, still same group of teachers. They work well together. And then to shift it so you don't have, it's going to be a different administrative structure, 4 or 5. So that's just.
Yeah, I think and I think it should be the committee answering, probably not me, but I think with older students, 2 to 5, having a school, not quite that big, but a large school, we can make it work a little bit better, or the architects can make the design work a little bit better. Having the youngest learners in a school of that size, I think is a real challenge.
Okay, and even creatively, you couldn't have the cafeteria and have the break-off wings. This is pre-K, kindergarten, this is first and second wing. And then that would be allowed for more expansion and growth for students. And then 4 or 5 would have.
That design can certainly be, the architects can work on a design that would make it work.
So
we can make anything work.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that this is the whole point of having this.
Yeah.
Is
Right.
we can
That's
talk
just
through
my,
all this.
It's what's your preference?
It is my preference, and I really, I don't know all the administrative stuff that goes on for 4 or 5, but my daughter did go through it during COVID, and just the teachers and administration and the communication and how they all get along to disrupt that. I think it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say, and then I'll stop saying, is that on option 4, there is a way to also maintain the 4 or 5. I think that was also part of that discussion.
Okay.
If again, the architects need some direction on this, but you can put the 4 or 5 in part of the building and 2, 3 in another part of the building, so you still maintain that 4 or 5 that a lot of people have said is very important.
Yep.
And those grade levels do, coalesce a little bit, 2, 3, 4, 5, when you look at that.
All right, so Avery, you've been waving your hand, so I'll start down there with you, and then we'll just go down the table.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so over the summer, I taught preschoolers at a camp, so I feel like I have some sort of, reference for what it's like to teach preschoolers and kind of like how their minds work. So first of all, I think that you need small classrooms. You can't have high school size classrooms and pack like 25 kids in there because, you can't have the same approach. You also can't have the same ratios. You can't pull off the same ratios of high school students to teachers as you can preschool students to teachers. At the high school, you can probably, I don't know what the numbers are, I'd imagine there's somewhere around 16 to 1 for students to teachers. But for a preschool, you want something like 5 to 1, because it's just, they need so much more. They're so much more demanding than high schoolers or middle schoolers or even, kids at the elementary school. I think another important aspect is not to have too much of a range of students that preschoolers are around, because they do get scared, they get intimidated by a lot of things. So anything that's not, you know, like kind of intimate, like, I'm just thinking, for example, at MIW, how you walk in and then you have like kind of this great big space with the library and, you know, a stairway, and you have the multiple avenues of wings. And I don't know how well that would work for preschoolers. So I think that, you know, taking an approach that keeps it in mind, keeps kind of like, yeah, I don't know if MIW is the right fit for kids at the preschool level. So that's just one thing to consider.
Thank you, Avery. I did not know that you were a preschool teacher this summer.
Yeah.
Nice work. Mike?
I just had a question. So on focusing in on keeping pre-K and K in Mabel Wilson, and a question about bathrooms, and if we're going to be expanding that, because it's either, I don't know if it's mandated, and Julie, I'm looking at you, but to have bathrooms in the classrooms for kids that teaching kids at that young age. So I don't know if we have enough classrooms with bathrooms, so we would have to do some renovations to the bathrooms. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, and the toilet sizes. We had to put littler toilets in for pre-K, and we would need to do that. So even the classrooms that have some toilets, I think that Scott has sort of said all along, Mabel, I will need renovation sort of 1 through 5 on this document. I mean, there's going to be work that will have to be done across the board depending on what's decided, but certainly the toilets are one of those things. And sinks right there.
Yep. Yeah. That totally threw me off, hearing your voice come right here. As if I was delayed in my reaction, that's why. So I just thank you for that. And I think that's also something where we note that that option would be potentially not as expensive overall. Maybe, probably, but maybe not. I mean, that will require some renovations within Mabel Wilson. I think we should be prepared for that. And we want to Avery's point, we want to take this opportunity, if this is the avenue we go down, to make it the best possible place for the earliest learners.
Tyler, I just wanted to.
Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, the one thing I'd say is that any option you choose is going to require something to be done at Mabel I. Wilson School.
Yeah.
So there's no just building on another site and not touching Mabel I. Wilson School. We have security issues, drop-off, flow issues to the building. So that is going to require work regardless.
Yeah.
Okay. Jason?
So I was on the call the other day. I had to jump off, but so my very first choice would have been neighborhood schools, but I just don't think that's feasible. I think it would create a great environment, but going through the process and looking at the numbers that Jeff sent, it's important to point out that Cumberland is twice the size as North Yarmouth on each grade. So if we even tried to go down that road, we'd end up with 2 huge projects. We'd have a full-on North Yarmouth project, and we'd have to do a similar size project in Cumberland. I just don't think that's feasible. So my very first choice, Vanessa, was actually number 2. And of course, I'm telling Jeff I want tiny schools, but then I want the efficiencies of scale of building, you know, one large unit. But that kind of was my original first choice, with a heavy emphasis, to Avery's point, on wings and sort of a, you know, common areas, and this is little kids and this is the next little kids, and just making it feel smaller. And I'm confident, based on what Tyler Barter said from Oak Point, that we can do that, breaking things up. Being that I couldn't be on the entire call, I talked to Susie today and sort of got her feedback on number 4 as well. I'm kind of okay with 2 or 4, but I'd like to hear on the rest of the call, and maybe from Susie and Julie, how did we get away from number 2 and onto number 4, because they are only 50 kids difference, and somehow logically number 2 is kind of better in my mind. They start there and they come down, and we could actually build onto the new building, overbuild for future flexibility, because if this pre-K stuff gets to be bigger and bigger numbers, we don't have, it'll be more expensive to try to fit that into MIW. So how did we get from number 2 to number 4, and what's your feelings on those?
I can't speak to how you got from number 2 to number 4. I'm going to pass the mic to Susie, but she keeps telling me to go first, so I'll give you my opinion and then I'll pass it to Susie. I think that a piece of how it probably got there is that there was a committee who did this study for quite some time, and their recommendation was really a pre-K 2 school and then a 3-5 school. That's what the committee that had a bunch of stakeholders had, and then that sort of shifted to a pre-K 1 school, and so those are really 4 and 5, and I think taking some of that historical data, certainly. And then I just want to sort of side note, there are really clear regulations at the state level, Avery, about number of teachers per students in pre-K, and it does not match high school numbers. So that is certainly something that we don't even have a choice in. We have to have higher number to teacher-student ratio, certainly. So Susie, I'll let you talk to how you guys got there, since I wasn't in that meet.
Sure. And anyone else who is on the committee should feel free to speak. It's okay. I think Julie said it well, Jason, that the original committee really was looking at a pre-K through 2 building when we met 3 years ago. And the pre-K 1 seemed like a better fit than the pre-K 3, because you're taking the smallest students and putting them in one of the largest buildings, if not the largest in the district. So that's how we ended up on 4. Like I said to you on the phone, number 5 is obviously the one that was recommended by the committee and fits best with the main learning results and those benchmarks. But number 4 seemed like a compromise with the group that we were talking to last week for the facilities people. So anyone else who was there on the conversation last week, feel free to add to that.
I'll just add that one of the conversations that came up, and I want to say thank you to Jeff for kind of pushing this, is he said, and I appreciated this because I remember it, he said, if we want to be serious about outdoor learning, then we should think about how this new space is going to be used in that capacity. And one of the things that came up in the conversation was there's a lot of access to outdoor space in this new place, or new location. How can we best use it? And one of the things was, we all know that pre-K through 1 can learn magical things about outdoor, in outdoor learning, but they don't need trails necessarily, and their stamina is a lot shorter. And so if we really want to be serious about outdoor learning and engaging in this beautiful new property, engaging with 2 through 5 grades will be a greater use of that space. So that was something that came up, knowing that, 4th graders can go on a hike, whereas kindergartners might last a half an hour. So that was definitely something that I remember as a big part of the conversation, especially if we are looking to greening our campus and spending that time outdoors and really taking advantage of that 76 acres. Anybody else from the committee that would be able to speak to how we got to 4? Peter, do you remember any kind of major?
No, I just think it evolved, and I think Susie was very, very helpful on this, because we really needed that input. And I just think it was a thing that evolved and said, and then the other thing, to be fair, is that that yes, we're going to have to do some substantial renovations to Wilson, but part of it hopefully is going to be helped by the energy thing, so that again, it may or may not be as costly. I mean, we will find out, but a couple things did pop up, and I think it was well brought up on the tonight with the pod thing, that we can, now that we have this input from the board, that as we work with the architects that, that there is a feeling, and obviously Susie and we'll be bringing more folks on, and I think once we get to a point where we think we want to go, I'm not sure after the discussion we had the other night with the council and the school board that we might want to, once we get the configuration done, that we might want to reconstitute the building committee again and get, again, more input from our staff and our faculty. Also, I would, just politically, I think it would be good to have, you know, representative from the select person and the town council, and also some of the folks that were on that committee before from both communities that, you know, have got some body of knowledge. So I think, depending on where the board finally comes down, that the facilities committee can kind of sort out the nature of the building committee, and I think it will help based on the discussion we had the other night. Different elements of the community engaged. So that's, but it was really one of the more interesting meetings I've been, because nobody had any real total sense of ownership. As ideas came in, we kind of shifted, and it was good. I felt good after the meeting, and we'll see where you folks come on it.
Right. So, do you have any other comments at this moment? To talk through any other?
I think I've stated
Yeah.
what I like, what I prefer.
Kevin, do you want to give us your thoughts?
Sure. It's nice to be in the middle and you guys do all the heavy lifting. So a couple things. I think Susan made a good point about that original committee, talking about, you know, staying true to that vision, and I came in at the tail end of that, and it was, I understood why the decision was made and how it was made for that, and there was an awful lot of expertise weighing in on why that made sense. A couple of the things that jump out at me is, as you look at those options for North Yarmouth, and if I'm just going to restrict this to 4 and 5, even though I kind of like 2, but here's my concern: that cadence of transportation that we're going to be up against, depending on what the grade configuration is over there, the cascading impact of start times. The other things that jump out, the larger that school is, you know, I always look at things, and I think we all are, so I'm not going to pretend this is unique. What's most cost effective? And then more importantly than just what we can afford in the moment is that ongoing operating costs. And they, honestly, some of those things feel like they may be extreme. And then if you play it out just one step further, I like the smaller buildings. So I'm looking at, well, any of these. So we've got pre-K to whatever, that middle block that of 2 to whatever, 6 and 8 staying fairly static, and the high school is always staying the same. And one of the things that is absolutely clear in this community is nobody wants to hear from us within 10 years of saying we need another building project. But you're going to have that confluence of events that is, each of these different buildings have to go somewhere, and that's the unchanged building. And that scares me, because if we've got 600 plus people coming into the community, they're all going to end up in one place. And I mean, it's not saying that that's going to start in one grade and bubble up, but I think that has to be part of any of our discussions. I guess if I look at this, when I think about who would be off of campus, when I look at Plan 4, I like the smaller scale at Maple I. I think that lets people be on campus and could have an implication on the ability of high school students that are interested in something with early childhood education, having that opportunity of a bigs and littles, that type of configuration. The 2 to 5, it does give a large school, but if we've learned anything about Oak Point, they are prolific in the way that they design. And having been in a number of those buildings that were of this size, it sure didn't feel that when you were in the building. My fear, though, is what 2 to 5 loses by not being on campus, and one of those things happens to be swimming lessons, and some of those other things that can happen here on campus. But I guess I side towards that and taking enough of your time.
Okay, so I have 2 questions for you.
Lots of answers ready.
Did you say that we should be including conversations about renovations to the high school?
No, I'm just saying that we are naive as a board not to think about where those people are going to end up. And look, I'm off of this board in a few months. So it's going to be easier for me to stand there and say bad things to you. But at that point, both towns are absolutely right when they say they don't want to hear from us looking for more money. And those days are going to come. So when you look at the way you bought space here, again, look at 4. So maybe I can handle that with not a lot of work other than really small facilities. 2 to 5, you can build that to scale. 6 and 8 buys you some space over there. So you've bought capacity in each of those. But all of that capacity goes to that one building.
Mike?
Question related to that. I think it's a good point. Also, be wary of somebody launching a write-in campaign to put you back here, just so you know. Did we buy space for the high school here? Does this provide us additional space? And related, when we did those number projections, I'd love to see that chart again of when we were looking at the project that was going to be on campus. We showed the projected numbers of students through like 2029, 2030, and what they look like in high school as well, and how the high school reacted and what the extra space was or not, because I think that would be helpful to your question as well. And in that scenario, do we include this spaces because we're connected to the high school?
So I'll answer a couple of things about that. This is a really great question. It's going to come up 100 times. So Kevin, thank you for putting it out there because we've got to answer it. So the high school, I'm going to offer a couple of things, and I don't see Dawn here. I think Dawn could speak better to this than I can, but we lose 5 to 8% of our incoming 9th graders to private schools every year. So we don't retain all of them. That's historic. We used to lose 10%. We're now down to 5 to 8%, depends on the year. But we do lose some students to private schools going into 9th grade. So that's one piece that we see about high school that's a little bit different. The second piece that's different about high schools is that when a teacher is in a classroom and they are not teaching a block because of meetings or prep, they have a block where they're not in their room. At a high school level, you can schedule another class in there when the teacher is not using that room or does not have a class in that room. So at the elementary level, that doesn't happen. You know, basically, you can't schedule things into an elementary room. Kids go to a special for 40 minutes. They really might be gone for 35 minutes because it takes time to get in and out of the room. At the middle level, kids are in teams. They go to Allied Arts, the same situation. So those rooms are being used almost continuously throughout the day. At the high school level, it's a little unique. So we do have classrooms where a block a day, that room is not being used. Or it might be, 2 blocks in a 3-day rotation or whatever it is. My point is that a high school schedule, you can schedule in another class into that room when the block is being used. It's very different at the high school level. So the space issues are not the same. Now, we can have a study done to see exactly, look at our enrollment, and can we handle that? But my guess is if I was going to give you, if I couldn't do a study and I could just guess, we could largely handle the enrollment coming for just that reason. And I know that when I've had conversations with high school administration in the past about this, that is what we've talked about.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that probably in the late 80s, 1990, we had probably 850 in the high school, we actually had to bump up to a Class A school for 2 years because of the enrollment. So we had about 125 to 150 more students without what we did here. Just a little bit of history.
Tom, you just raised your hand.
Oh,
a
yeah.
second ago.
Yeah, sorry to jump ahead. It seemed like a pretty good segue, though. I have the spreadsheet open with the 2019 enrollment projections, because I'm a huge nerd like that, and I have spreadsheets in front of me all the time. So I agree with all the points being made that this would de-densify all of our schools except for the high school, and it's something that we need to keep in mind looking forward. So back to the bigger point. So I find option 4 really appealing because it avoids having the young kids in a gigantic school, and it adds a lot of capacity to the district, which we sorely need. So we're looking at this opening up maybe like fall 2026, is that right? 25 if we're lucky?
If the referendum is held in June 22, I mean, we're talking about roughly 3 years, maybe a little less.
25 if we're lucky.
Okay, so, looking at the 2019 projections, and I'm really eager to see the new ones, if they were to hold in fall 2026, so say we open this brand new school with 800 to 850 capacity, the current projections for grades 2 through 5 have us at 873 for fall 2026. And we don't want to be in a position where we're opening a new school that is crammed, or we're adding portables to a brand new school.
We cannot do that.
No, we cannot do that. So this may be conservative here, and we need to think about having a bigger school than what we're currently projecting here. But what is our level of comfort for having a school that's grades 2 through 5? Like, are we willing to have a 950 student school for those grades? So I think we should pay really close attention to what these new projections look like, because that could have a huge impact in the direction we're going here.
I think, Tom, one of the things there, I think that was the struggle for me between 4 and 5. When I looked at it, that's why I was leaning towards 5 as opposed to 4. So,
yeah, I think that's a good point, Tom. I think the new numbers are going to be really important. I mean, we don't know, but COVID definitely, took down our projections a little bit, just like they did most districts in Maine. So we are just now rebounding from 2 years ago, our enrollment. So we've just gotten back to where we were 2 years ago. We're just a few students less than we were 2 years ago. So we're definitely not anywhere close to the projection that we would have been at this point. I think we're about a little over 100 students off the projection that we probably would have made that projection if COVID hadn't happened, but parents made different decisions, and they've kept those decisions at this point. And so that's where our numbers are. So I think, and Rebecca, she's aware of all that. We've had these conversations. She's looking at all these numbers and trying to project out, based on kind of the COVID hit, what happens next for projections and new numbers. So, obviously it's not going to be magic, but it will give us something better to go on. Because you're right. Do we want a school of 950 students? Probably. I mean, I know that's just too big.
Okay, Jennifer.
All right. A lot of people have gone before me, so I have kind of some, I think, all over the place. I had Tom's comment also when looking at the projections. Can we table this discussion or like the decision until we get her numbers? Because so many kids have gone private at all the grade levels that I feel like it's not responsible of us to make a big decision until we see her numbers. I think that would be a huge part. One thing is, by putting the 6-8 in North Yarmouth, we could actually put sports fields around there, and it would make that a little bit easier when we have issues with sports fields. I know we shouldn't make that decision on that, but I think that as we're doing this, we have to consider what type of fields we're going to put out there and how we're going to get the kids after school there. And I know that's minor at this point. And to Tyler's point about the outdoor space, I think it's really great to keep that in mind. It shouldn't be the biggest factor because in the middle school and the high school, we're really not using our outdoor space at all at this point and during the fall. So maybe it's just based on what grade level would actually go outside. I think it's been disappointing to see that we haven't been able to go outside as much. You know, in the middle school, eating outside, we're not able to really do that or to learn outside. So I think, you know, that's a huge missed opportunity that the middle school and high school has hit this fall. I guess the only question I have is, with the different proposals, what sort of administrative fixed costs are there that are different? So is one, if we're looking at 4 versus the other one, are there more principals, administrative staff, gym teachers, or things like that that we're going to have in one scenario versus the other? And have we looked at that?
That is a very good question. I think at the pre-K one, if it was a pre-K 1 school, we would just have one administrator for that age level and for those number of students. And I guess I'm just saying this off the top of my head, but at a 2-5 school, we would certainly need, you know, 2 administrators for that size of a school if we're going to do that. I think those are the configurations that I had looked at in terms of administrative support.
So would it be adding 1 versus what we currently have, or are we saying that the administrators that we currently have, we have the right number, we're just going to move them around?
So we have
Or are we
3
gonna
elementary
hire?
administrators full-time right now. So in that scenario, my first look, you know, we'd have to study this more and look at all the numbers and make sure we've got it. But, you know, it would work with 2 at the North Yarmouth site if it was a 2-5 school, and a pre-K 1 school would have 1 administrator. But again, this is just like my first, this is what it might look like.
Jeff, can I just jump in on the second part of your question, which was like PE and some of those other things? I don't want to speak to allied arts, although I think it runs a similar structure to special education. And when you have a smaller school, you end up with part-time staff there. And then you have staff traveling and you lose time, right? And you also lose the opportunity to sort of group students in special education. So you need to allocate more resources. So there definitely is a staffing implication that I'm not sure has been fully, I wasn't in that other conversation that happened, but I don't know how much that's been fleshed out. But in terms of special education, there's absolutely a staffing implication depending on the option. The smaller school you have, the more part-time staff you have, those staff are then traveling to other buildings and they have less of an opportunity to group students, so more individual services require more staff, right? So that's just something to keep in mind, and I would suspect that that is similar for allied arts, and that sort of if they don't have enough allied arts schedules to fill a full week, they would go to another building, and you then are planning for travel time and whatnot in there.
Yeah, I was going to say that is a really important point, because what we don't want to have happen, even though it's 8 minutes away, we do not want to be sharing staff, you know, between campuses as much as possible. We really want to reduce that, because every time we do that, we lose a lot of time in the middle of the day.
Yep.
So.
And just the fact of following up with a teacher. I know it's more like in the middle school and the high school, but when they go to another building, I think it's hard for kids to make the connection on trying to get to them if they need them on a different day or time.
Right.
And that's a big concern.
So for the IEPs and the 504 plans and the RTI, is it better to have pre-K first, second, and third together because they streamline across the board than to have pre-K 1 here and then 2, 3 in another school, because that same special ed tech teacher services, say, up to 3rd grade, or can
state. You see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, so the special ed certification allows them to do differently than what you're articulating. Really, pre-K to 2 would be full-time special ed staff, I would speculate, depending on what size the committee wants to do in terms of pre-K. And then certainly 3-5. I also would just sort of highlight, and I know, Jeff, you're not on that page right now, but the alignment to sort of the main learning results, the Common Core standards, all of those pieces for number 5, that pre-K to 2 building and the 3-5 building really does sort of allow for full-time allied arts, full-time special ed staff, and what that looks like. Again, projections around pre-K may change that a little bit. If you maintain one classroom of pre-K like we have now, that's going to be different than if you have a couple of classrooms of pre-K. So, but certainly having full-time K-1-2, what we've seen is 3 grades is about perfect for allied arts teachers to have a full schedule, and similarly for special education. Like Jeff, I'm talking sort of globally without really specific numbers in place, but again, you have to think about not only special educators, but related service providers like occupational therapy, physical therapy, social work, nurses, school counselors, and if folks don't sort of have a full-time job, they are traveling to another building, and not only the students sort of finding them and being able to connect, but them themselves on morale, feeling part of either building, right? Which staff meeting do I go to? Which supervisor do I report to? And some of those pieces. So I would just sort of say from my very narrow view, which is a percentage of the population, there is a consideration there around grouping and staffing. And likely if we started looking in other areas, I think there likely is for the structure of teaming at middle level or co-teaching or allied arts or some of those other areas as well.
So you would lean towards option 5 from a IEP 504 RTI allied arts perspective?
Yeah, from instructional support, that would be the most effective for students, certainly. And again, I know when the committee did this several years ago, that was a piece of the conversation and the data that was reviewed. I mean, I should say really transparently, we'll make anything work. It just will have different price tag attached to it, right? But our students will benefit wherever we are, and we'll make that happen. I do just think there is a cost that goes with having folks travel from one building to another. That's not just, I mean, even if we have people walk across right now, the campus, somehow we lose big chunks in the middle of the day.
Yeah, because I know some.
We did it for 30 years.
Or 4, and then some come to 3.
Exactly.
The math, I think it's the math specialist shares that responsibility.
Yep.
So, no, that's good to know that. So there's the 3 groups, pre-K first and second, full-time. They'll be within that umbrella. They'll feel like a team and a part of the group. Okay, thank you.
But we did, just for institutional memory before one puts one in, that we operated on this model for 30 years. We had Wilson and we had North Yarmouth, and I think you're right. Some of the special ed has probably changed significantly from when we had NYMS, but we operated 2 schools quite successfully for 30 years. Geographically apart, and I don't see any reason why we can't do it again.
Absolutely, Peter. I worked here only 1 year when NYMS was open, and we did. I mean, absolutely. Yeah. We just shared staff, right? Some special ed staff came to the campus and vice versa, and just sort of pointing out that if we're projecting forward, we know that cost, and we foreshadow that that's what's coming, and that we don't have blinders on to the implication of what that looks like from an instructional support standpoint, certainly.
It's also a difference of grade configuration, too. MYS was only 4 or 5. There's a difference in the number of students in the buildings, in the needs.
And some of it's even like, I mean, there's a lot of nuancing, that goes with special education, but even like caseloads. Like right now, we have a 4-8 FLS program, but at the high school, we have a 9-12 FLS program, but we're actually adding another, FLS program. 9 to 22.
It's a big difference.
So age 22. So, I mean, it really, sometimes it depends on the students that you have, and there's a lot of different factors. I think generally speaking, that does make sense. And it also depends on the projections. I think Rebecca's numbers will be really important in looking at like how many students are we really talking about and what do we usually have for this number of students that are identified, students that are identified for each program that we have. But it can change, just to let you know, just depending on the students that we actually have that year. So.
Jeff, can I just ask a question? In her projections, is she including the percentage of students that have gone private? Into those, it's not just households with kids?
Nope. She asked, in fact, she asked for our private numbers first.
Good.
And then she asked for our homeschooling numbers.
Okay.
She asked for
Good.
everything that we have.
Okay.
She's pulled the permits for housing
Good.
again, which she did in
Okay.
2019 as well. So yeah, she's looking at all of those things.
Good.
Yep.
So I want to give Ann a chance to give some feedback, but I do recognize that we are waiting on a pretty significant amount of information, and I think there is some value at having this, but then also bringing this back to a workshop, which may be something that we have to add to our calendar. I'm not sure, but it's obviously a priority, and I would assume that most of us would be open to coming back to this conversation in the near future. So, Ann.
Yeah, I mean, well, I would first add that based on the materials and the agenda, I wasn't anticipating us making a determination this evening, and I don't feel comfortable doing so. I would want to wait until we've had time to think about this and get additional information. That being said, I think one thing that I struggle with too, though, is I'm looking forward to having those projections. And it doesn't mean that the students who have left for private school would necessarily stay in that private school, you know, once things are in a different position COVID-wise, and same with homeschooling. So I think I kind of struggle with that. Out of all of the options, I think I lean towards 5, and I recognize that that would be that could be a different change for staff, or maybe not in terms of grouping. Otherwise, I don't think I had any other questions or concerns that hadn't already been brought up by other board members, so thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Avery?
Yeah, has it been considered to build multiple buildings on this land?
Well, I know that when we talked as a facilities committee, the concern of large buildings with small students was part of the conversation.
Yeah.
And thankfully, as has been mentioned multiple times, Tyler Barter from Oak Point has said they have the ability to make wings or to create, and I think for those of you that remember the campus design that was on campus, it was kind of to that point. So there was a very distinct area where the youngest learners were, and then, but it was still one building, and I think just for efficiencies, it was still one building. But they were able to talk about creative ways that they could create areas of each part of the building to make it feel like it was multiple buildings in a way.
Okay. But, you know, what if, you know, you could even have a bunch of maybe like smaller buildings, like, I want to say 10, like maybe a little larger than those portables out there, and have them completely empty with fittings so you can make classroom sizes however you want. I'm just throwing that out there. It's kind of, but yeah, and you could orient them to, if you had to build them into each other, you could. If you wanted to go a different direction, maybe you want to put middle schoolers out there. Maybe not. Maybe you want to incorporate nature more into the campus. Then you can plant trees around. But that's all I have to say about that.
So anything's possible. Avery, you did just kind of make my brain wonder something, which I hadn't really wondered about before. Although Jason had brought up the point, so I did go to the multiple buildings out there, but I hadn't thought about it this way. You know, maybe there's a pre-KK little facility.
Yeah.
Doesn't have any infrastructure with it, but it's its own little facility on the property, and you have a 1 through 3 building out there next
Right.
door.
Yeah.
Nobody says you can't do it. A pre-KK building wouldn't have any needs in terms of infrastructure. You don't need a big gym. You might need a little multi-purpose room, and that's probably all you need.
Yeah.
But I'm just throwing that out.
Thanks. So even more of a reason that we should probably continue this conversation So I know that there was a hope that we would probably leave this workshop with all of us giving some guidance on a direction. It sounds like we're not quite there yet because we have some pretty strong information coming our way.
Fine.
However, this was still a great use of time, and I think it's really important that we have these workshops. So I will work with Jeff to figure out when the best time is to workshop this again with the new information. Peter, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that if that is important that if the contract with Oak Point is approved tonight, that I think we need to continue with the site work. Where I assume everybody understands that we're still going to build a building over in North Yarmouth, and we can have 30 little yurts over there, or God knows what else. But on the other hand, we've still got to have a sewer, we've still got to have electricity, gas lines, and all that thing. So I'm assuming that the board we're going to continue with the structural stuff, but I might add, as soon as we do get this, as soon as we do get the enrollment figures, I think we can strategize all we want to, but if we want to get this thing built before 2030, we've got to kind of get off the dime at that point and give the committee some direction. But I think this has been valuable. I think the key thing coming out of this is certainly if that we do, especially for the 4 or 5, wanted to develop to Tyler to do some kind of a pod model so that we continue. So I think that was key. But we need to keep going forward if we do want to build this sometime before, who knows.
Totally agree. So again, I think we need to have a facilities meeting. We need to have, once we get this information again, and if it looks like it's important enough for us to call a special meeting, I just looked at the calendar. Our next meeting is until the 6th of December because of the holiday. So just thinking about that, I think what we'll do is we'll wait till we get the information, then figure out when the next best time is to workshop this.
Okay.
Tyler, can I just ask Scott to talk about transportation, because Kevin, you had mentioned that, and I know that's a concern of elementary parents too. How do I pick a child up in one place and then the next?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the whole issue of picking up students and stuff, we actually had a little bit of alternating times between the two buildings when we had, North Yarmouth Memorial School there, so there were different pickup and drop-off times at both locations. A lot of the students were on the playgrounds as the buses, were waiting there. You can also alternate the start and the end times of both schools so that the buses would basically be loaded at each building, and then they crisscross, okay? And then you arrange the routes such that, the buses that are going the further way out are actually going over to North Yarmouth as the other buses are coming towards Mabel I. Wilson School in order to do that. So, but that's not been an issue for us to deal with in the past. So, and we'd probably look at adding a few buses in order to maybe reduce some of the run times out to some of the longer areas in town.
And we would just stagger, Scott, maybe, and I think this was done
Yep.
before,
Yep.
just stagger the time, the school times,
Correct.
just by like a few minutes.
Yep, you just stagger
in
the
order to
times
make
just
it
a little
work.
bit on each end in order to make it
So
work.
if a parent also wanted to pick their child up, and they have children on campus, and they have a child out there, if the staggered times were, for dismissal or arrival, there's a 10-minute window, then they have plenty of time to get to both places and get their children if
they can.
They need to and not worry about it. Okay.
It'd be even better if they took the bus.
Better if they took the bus, but if they're not,
But if they don't, they can.
Very
There's a way to
doable.
get that done. Okay.
I just, I think for a lot of people that haven't lived here for a long time, that don't have the memory of NYMS being in North Yarmouth, that feels like a huge concern. How am I going to get 2 kids in 2 different places? So for us that have attended there and have experience working with that model, it seems like, oh yeah, we just do it. But I think it's totally a valid concern that people are worried about.
What's interesting about it too, Tyler, is that the new location that we're looking at now really isn't that far. I mean, it's like almost a rock's throw from, you know, the old North Yarmouth Memorial Building. I mean, when we took our rides and stuff, it's like, what, a mile, I think?
It was 8 minutes, no traffic, 8 minutes.
So it was almost like just a mile's different,
Yeah,
a mile's
just about
difference from
yeah.
where we were, so.
Yeah, and I mean, just, you know, oh, sorry, I don't want to interrupt.
No, Jason was going to.
When will those new numbers be ready, and to what degree do those numbers have to move as a percentage before it changes this chart? I just don't want to delay things if we don't need to. And I think something to keep in mind is this needs to be something that the voters are going to support, and I think there's a significant difference in the total cost, if we do a significant renovation to MIW. So I'm just thinking happy medium here, because we have a lot of older people in town that don't have kids, and we need their support.
Yeah, I think that is a good, I mean, I don't know if the enrollment numbers will shift these 5 options, for example, all that much. It will just shift it in the sense, okay, are we talking about, you know, 800 kids if it's certain grade level, or are we talking about, you know, 850 kids? I don't know, but the numbers are supposed to be in this week. And that was my latest communication at the end of last week.
So are we able to narrow this down at all?
I mean, I'm willing to listen. It sounds like we've had a pretty variety of responses to, I'm hearing 5, 4, and option 2 are the most common that I'm hearing. Is there any that we can rule out?
Straw vote. Let's just see who's comfortable moving forward at this point. And if it's...
Well, actually, I've shifted now that Julie has spoken.
You've shifted?
Yes, I understand what she's coming from with the IEP and the 504 and the full arts, and it made a lot of sense.
What I was hearing is that people were feeling uneasy making a decision without the new enrollment numbers. If I'm hearing that differently, I'm more than happy to move this forward.
I just think we're never going to be 100% comfortable. And I just don't expect that the numbers are going to change this chart. They're certainly valuable, for sure, but I think the numbers would have to move a lot before that chart changes.
You know, I do agree with that to a large extent, but I've seen Ms. Wandell's numbers. Not these ones, of course. I don't have a secret copy. It'd be much cooler if I did. But that being said, her numbers have been right on. And so when I think about using the implications of data, at least to further justify what we do, to apply deeper knowledge, I think I'm inclined to wait for that so that I don't feel emotional in my response. That's just my perspective.
1 week, Jeff, you're thinking?
I think, you know, even though I was thinking about the next meeting, December 6th, I think even if you workshopped it again on that date, I think that would be fine. I think if we get much later than that, I think we're putting off the design phase. But I think, you know, as late as December 6th is probably fine. You can check with Oak Point, but I don't think there's a major problem with that.
Okay, thank you.
Tom?
So I have a question related to number 5 here. So there's one piece that's incomplete. So if you look at this, you think we're adding 650 to 700 seats in our classes. But if we're doing a substantial renovation to Mabel I. Wilson, we'll also be adding capacity there. Do you have a sense of how many additional students we would be able to take on in that newly renovated school?
So, okay, this is a complicated answer. So the architectural capacity of Mabel I. Wilson School right now is 540 students. Now, I keep saying this, but I think it's lower than 540, only because we have some very involved programming in our district that probably brings it down more comfortably around 500 or so. That's just my take. But we can, with the existing facility, 540. Now, right now, we're about 200 students over that, and that's why we have so many modulars to work with students. It also depends on the grade level, and what, grades are actually in that facility. But the last plan, Scott, remind me, was it 8 or 10 classrooms, or 8 to 10 classrooms?
I thought it was 8 to 10 classrooms.
8 to 10 classrooms. And at one point, we talked about 12. I don't know if, I think there was some disagreement as to whether or not we really needed that much space, but there was some discussion about flex rooms. So I guess use anywhere from 8 to 12 classrooms.
$9 million.
But that's when we were building a different school. That's when we were building a pre-K to 1 school, right? We were going to make that right?
No, I think that was the 3 to 5 plan. Trying to remember. We've gone through a lot of different plans right now, but.
I thought that it was going to be that the new school wasn't going to have grade 2 in there, right?
Right.
The new one was only going to be
So it wasn't a
pre-K through
3-5 school, it was a 2.
Yes, you're right. Thank
right?
you. 2 to 4.
2-3. I thought it was a 2-3 and 4-5, 6-8. I mean, we're all staying at the middle school.
It was a 2 to 4, now that you remind me, 2 to 4, and then it was going to be a 5-8 at the middle school. So it would be 3 grades.
So that's one more grade level than what we're talking about.
Right. So
Okay,
really, you can only put in like 2.5 grades at the most at Wilson School, going forward with the projections that we have. So you're talking about a fairly sizable increase in classroom space at the Wilson School if you want to put 3 grades in to be comfortable with all the programming that we have, and not to fill it up immediately. That is the best way to look at it.
And I think something should be said too, that what I've heard all along is that Wilson School needs a major renovation. Even if it stays at two grade levels, that school needs a big, and I don't know, this is what I've heard all along, that those rooms need to be done, the whole thing. So like for us to look at it and say, we can just put some little toilets in there, I think we're going to have to do a lot more, and I think everyone should be aware of that.
Absolutely.
And that's what I've heard, and maybe I'm completely wrong, but like, I think those classrooms, we're doing the window wall or whatever, but it's, maybe not a big addition, but everything is going to be touched really in that school when we do a renovation.
That's
I
right.
mean,
Right?
there's some areas that are fresh.
Right, and
Okay,
we-
that need some things done to it.
We can't go
But
into
there are
this
some-
blindly.
No, there are some areas, as we mentioned, the parent entrance, the existing bus loop entrance, the flow, the security. I mean, there's a lot of things like that need to be addressed in that building. And then, of course, some of the classroom spaces that need to be looked at as well, so.
Especially on top of.
Okay.
Yeah, so there are pieces like that.
Not to get in the
that are-
weeds, I'm just
No.
saying that everything, we need
no.
all the information,
Yeah.
so.
So it's, we still have I just want to stay focused knowing that we still have an agenda. Kevin, Peter, and then I think maybe we'll call it for tonight for workshop.
No, I'm
You're good?
I'm good to go, but I think we need to come to some kind of a decision the 6th of December. We're
Yes.
going to fall behind.
Agreed.
So the only thing that I wanted to add or ask is if there was a sizable addition to Wilson, which we know that additions in any case, and you do represent this on the slide, renovations and additions are more expensive than new construction. Would those fine folks at the DOT look at anything changing on campus as an opportunity to mandate any of those changes to Main Street or Tuttle Road, leaving us right back where we were before?
Right, that's a
That's
good
a really
point.
good question.
That's a very good point.
That's a very good question.
So everybody stare at the ceilings tonight, you'll be fine.
That should be
It's a conversation, and
that
then
should
if
be
you're
an
pulling
answer
a
we
lot
find.
of students off the campus,
Say
maybe
that
that'll
again?
help offset some of those thoughts or conversations. But you're right, that's a major
But the
concern.
bodies may be leaving.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because if we have pushed that down the street a few times, I would just hate that to come back as everybody says, my God, I really
We need to have
like
that
that.
answer for you on the 6th.
Yes, please.
Okay, good.
Can we
Thanks.
take a non-binding straw vote between 2, 4, and 5, just so maybe looking at the crowd, we can eliminate one of them?
Do people feel comfortable doing a straw vote? No?
Knowing that's not binding, knowing that we get new numbers in a week.
I'd prefer not to, just it seems like a lot of people are unsure with their
Okay.
numbers, but
I agree.
okay. I appreciate wanting to be efficient. I totally appreciate your efforts in that, but I think we're just not there yet. So we will add a workshop to the 6th. We will make sure that we have the updated information to us as soon as it's available so we can digest it.
Yep.
Answers about DOT concerns. And I think that's it for right now. Okay. So we will now move back into our business. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Susie.
Thank you.
Tyler, actually a question for you and Peter. Is it worth having a facilities meeting after we get the numbers ahead of the
Yeah.
6th? I would think wouldn't be bad
We
to hop on the
we
phone
will,
for
yes.
30
Yeah.
to 60 minutes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So thanks, everybody, for your flexibility in doing this a little differently tonight. We're going to move into superintendent's report, unless you want me to do committee reports first?
I can, why don't you do committee reports? Yeah.
All right. That makes Kevin first for finance.
So a few things. I don't have my notes.
Sorry.
So, my apologies. The DLT, I believe, begins work tomorrow on the construction of the budget, having some of those first conversations. You may recall that we had at least some tentative discussions around the budget calendar, and that will continue to be clarified, especially as we look at some of those dates where the community committees, the community boards had expressed interest in maybe trying to see if we could land on different dates. That is all.
Thank you. Policy, Anne?
We had a meeting just prior to this meeting tonight, and we'll be moving along one for first read and a few other policies recommended for deletion.
Thank you, Anne. Peter, facilities, anything additional?
No.
Okay. Jennifer, curriculum?
I'll make this quick. We had our first meeting on November 4th, which I think was productive. We talked a lot about the state mandating testing and different things around that and the timeline, and trying to get that a little bit clearer. We did have a student rep that was included in our meeting, which I think was very nice. And our next, and let's see, I was trying to think of if I missed anything else that we talked about. Our next meeting is the 1st of January.
Thank you. Communications, Mike?
Just really quick, that we're going to be putting in a big amount of effort to making sure that we get out as much information as possible and as clearly as possible about the school project. So if folks listening want and need more, please contact me. Happy to listen.
Thank you. Equity Leadership Steering Committee, I will just report that we haven't met since last time we reported, but we do have our first meeting, or our meeting for November, this Friday afternoon, and that will be our first meeting where we welcome Justine and Lawrence to the meeting.
I just have a quick question. Is that going to be recorded? And the only reason why I asked was a lot of teacher conferences going on this week.
On Friday afternoon?
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's not something that's off the table. I'll talk to Fran about it.
Yeah, it's not a big deal either. It's just, I have a conference and I can't go to it. So it's more of a personal agenda.
Okay, I will make a note. Okay, student reports. Avery?
Yeah, I think it's all pretty good. The only thing is, as our days get shorter, more and more students have wanted to look into junior privileges. I know that, like Portland High School, for example, has junior privileges. Lots of other high schools have junior privileges, and yeah, it's people want it for consideration.
Okay. All right, I don't believe there's any other updates to committees. Thank you, everybody. Jeff, you ready for your superintendent's report?
Yep, I'll try to go really quick. We had Day of Welcome, and it was really, it was great. We actually extended the Day of Welcome greeting part to the high school as well, and not just the middle school this year. So grades 4 through 12, you can see one of your fellow board members was greeting at the middle school as well. So 4-8 had 2 different greetings, and then the next day at the high school. So we had the Cumberland Police Department, Cumberland Fire and EMT also helped with greeting students as they came in during the, and Avery, I remember you were greeted, weren't you greeted? Did you enjoy that greeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I was like the last one there, and I was maybe a minute late.
Yeah, we
so
weren't going to say
it's a little-
anything, but you were toggling that tardy zone. Veterans Day activities. Our schools have been really active with Veterans Day activities at Mabel I. Wilson School, in the library. Second and third graders got to hear a book called Reckless. And this is a story of how American soldiers were helped in the Korean War by a horse. Third graders had a virtual visit with veteran Jen Till. She's a parent in our district. She's had a long connection with us as well around veterans. I remember years ago talking to her about this. She's the commander of Post 91 in Yarmouth, Legion 91 in Yarmouth, and she's been a great resource for our district in connecting us with veterans. At 4-5, a lot of different things were going on last week. The book 21 Steps was read to students, all students in 4th and 5th grade, along with Cemetery Keepers of Gettysburg. Actually, I think one book was read to 4th graders, one book was read to 5th graders. But Matt Tavares, who is the illustrator of 21 Steps, is actually a Mainer. Graduated from Bates College in 1997. And this was all commemorating the anniversary of, the 100th anniversary of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. I was in one of the classes when the students were having that book read to them, and then watched the changing of the guard at Arlington, which was really kind of always a fascinating to watch, whether you're in person or even watching it on video. So you can see Sally Soames, she works in the library at GMS. She's reading the book to 4th and 5th graders. And then another project, Dina McFarland and Kathy Follett are teachers at the middle school 4-5, and they teamed up and had a project called Wall of Heroes. So students went home, asked their parents and grandparents, who in our family is a veteran of any war in the United States, and this is the Wall of Heroes. And every veteran's name that students could come up with, they added those names. They had 2 walls worth of veterans' names, and they're still up at GMS 4-5. It's really kind of amazing to see that. In grades 6-8, in social studies, 8th grade teachers spend time talking about Veterans Day, the history of Veterans Day. And then one of our 8th grade social studies teachers, Peter Gillingham, this is something he's done for a number of years, collects cards from students in the 8th grade. Those cards are then, he delivers those cards to the veterans' home in Scarborough. I haven't had a chance to actually go and see it, but I have been told that when those letters are delivered, the residents of the Scarborough Veterans Home are absolutely thrilled to see those letters each year from our middle school. So I don't think it happened last year, so this year it was really great to return to that. University of Maine Orono Application Day. The admissions office, basically from UMaine, came to Greely High School last week, and 38, I think it was the week before actually, 38 seniors were accepted to the University of Maine on that day. We had 2 other students who were accepted prior to that, so it's 40 students now who have been accepted to the University of Maine. $125,000 was given to students should they choose to continue and go to the University of Maine next year. So that was offered. And then whodunit? Ken Fowler is a science teacher, teaches biology at the high school, and his students were involved in a murder mystery, and this was also put out in the GHS newsletter. So if you're interested in learning more, it'll be in my blog tomorrow. And then finally, a Greely Alumni Spotlight. We have a student who did something very unusual, graduated not too long ago. Ryan Pooler, 2017, has joined a very elite career, which is rodeo clown bullfighter. And this was actually in the Ranger Review. One of the students from the Ranger Review wrote this up, and I just took his information and put it up here. I thought it was fascinating. So Chase Kopp from the Ranger Review wrote this up, and this is Ryan Pooler on the left in what I consider to be a dangerous spot, but apparently he has been trained otherwise. And I lied, there's one more thing. Paths always announces students of the quarter, and it's always nice to see Greely students are in there. These are many high schools from the area send students. When we see Greely students who are recognized by the school, it's terrific in these programs. Quinn Richter from Greely in the cybersecurity program, Gabe Pollock in culinary arts, and Nate Dixon also from Greely, of course, in the music program. So congratulations to those students. So that will be in the superintendent's blog published tomorrow.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, so we will move into our items for action, which we have a lot of tonight. And I know Ann is doing a lot of heavy lifting with this, so thank you in advance.
Yeah, policy committee has been quite busy. The first one, to give a little information, we're recommending deletion because we've combined it with the policy that you've all received for first read tonight, JEA, compulsory attendance ages. So I recommend to vote approve removing policy JEA-AR, compulsory attendance ages, from the policy manual.
Second.
Any questions or discussion? Avery?
Yeah, when I read it, it refers to students as he, she, and I was wondering if there's any way that could be changed to they.
That we have been doing. This policy, we're deleting it from the policy manual, so it won't be there anymore.
Oh, okay.
But thank you for that.
Ann, can I ask a quick question? Should we wait to remove this after we implement the other policy? So I'm just asking, is there going to be a gap? Should we wait until the second read of the other policy and then do this?
I hadn't thought of that. Jeff?
So we don't have a gap in time?
Jennifer, I think you're right.
Yeah.
You're
I
actually.
get one for the night.
You
No,
are
thank
right.
you.
We should probably have that.
So why don't we
policy.
just table it?
I think tabling it sounds like a great suggestion.
Nice work, Jennifer.
Is that
Thank
okay?
you.
Yes, that's perfect.
Thank you.
It's probably not a big deal in all of it, if we had done it the other way.
No, I
You're
appreciate
right,
that.
though. Yeah, you're right.
Okay, so as far as tabling, a motion to table, do I have to do a second for that?
No,
Second.
we can just.
Okay.
okay.
All in favor to table? Thank you. All right, Ann, I'm just going to let you roll
Yep.
with these. Okay.
The next one, we are recommending to remove policy BHAB, school board candidate orientation, from the policy manual. I don't know if anyone has any questions.
Sure. So.
I should get the second first.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, open up for discussion. Jason?
Why are we removing it? I read through this and nothing seems particularly offensive, except, potentially we could reword it to take a little bit of burden off from Jeff, things that it doesn't seem like he should fully be responsible for candidates, but why are we removing both of these, actually?
Well, we were voting we had recommended removing the candidate one because it is, putting burden on the district for candidates who are wanting to run. I think, Jeff has been willing to provide that information to anyone who was asked, but to have it as a formal policy was above and beyond what was necessary for the district. I don't know, Mike or Vanessa, if you have anything else you want to add.
Yeah, just that the candidate one, just focusing on that for now, that seems, at least especially to me, that seems above and beyond what the district should be providing to the candidate. You're a candidate, you're for office, you should, jump in, do your own thing. And the candidate themselves can do outreach to the district and to the other board members, to the superintendent. But putting this on the district in particular, to me, seems like it's unnecessary. And it's not common, is it? This is not something that's done elsewhere.
No,
much.
I mean, occasionally someone will ask to come in and talk or whatnot, or meet with a board member. But it's not practice that we generally reach out and say, hey, do you want an orientation if you're running? We just haven't done that.
But we're not replacing it with anything, not even a statement. I mean, it just seems, just the optics of it seem bad.
I thought, I'm sorry, I didn't bring my notes from this, but I did feel the same way, Jason, and then we worked through it, that it was more on the candidate and not a policy that the school needs to be enforcing or that we need to be enforcing. And there is a book, school board, new school board
Handbook.
member handbook,
Yep.
that outlines all of that.
Yeah.
But I did have that same first initial thought on that.
The only thing that I would add is I think it's kind of unprecedented when people are running for office to have an orientation for it. And there's, any time that anyone has run for this, normally you hear from the candidate. They will reach out to folks. They will ask questions about what the role is before making that correct decision to run for school board.
Okay, is there any other, Tom?
Jeff, is there any way that this might actually protect you or save you some trouble? Like, for example, just clarifying that the candidate's not entitled to privileged information. Like, could you foresee a situation where somebody might approach you feeling entitled to certain things that now it's suddenly your discretion to determine those?
I don't think so. I mean, it's just like anybody asking for information. We have to say, well, we can't provide that. It's too, that level of information we can't provide at this time. So, I mean, I have parents that ask me for information. I have everybody asks for information from time to time, and, it's the same answer. That just isn't something we can provide. But, so I don't think having a policy on this would make any difference to me.
Any further discussion? Okay. All in favor? And those opposed? Thank you. All right, Anne?
The next one, before I make the motion, I will add that all of the deletions also have been recommended by Drummond Woodsum. And this one, we are recommending to delete because the information is found elsewhere, so it's unnecessary. So I recommend to approve removing policy BIA, new board member orientation, from the policy manual.
Second.
Any discussion on this one? Or questions?
That would have been helpful information. I should have asked that question. That Drummond Woodsum recommended that. Thank you.
Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? I saw everybody's hands up. Oh, you're opposed. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And now we are moving on to a number of motions related to all changes in the statute related to Title IX. We, in fact, were out of compliance with Title IX and working under an old policy, under our old policy that hadn't been updated. So I'm really glad that we have all of these before you tonight. I recommend to approve policy AC, non-discrimination / equal opportunity and affirmative action as presented.
Second.
Any questions or discussion on this? Jennifer?
And with saying that we were out of compliance with a few of these things, what is the policy approach of having Drummond Woodsum look at all of our information? So like, have they gone through everything that we have? Or is it like on a cycle basis and that's why this is just getting hit now?
No, it's on a cycled basis, and we had been trying to get these on the agenda last school year, but unfortunately, there were things that did come up and push that process back. So what it just means then is that if there was a violation of the policy, that we would have to follow our policy that would have been outdated.
And I will just add that Dorman and Whitson did a complete audit of our policies. They've done a complete audit of our policies twice since I've been here, and they just did another one. And that's why a lot of the deletions are coming forward and stuff like that.
So that was just completed in 2021?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Ann
That's
Chapman
good to
from
know.
Dorman and Whitson, I asked her, just look through our policy manual, like, give us some priorities and deletions and tell us what we can get rid of, and
We should probably
know.
do that every 3 years or something?
we
don't
should.
you
It's
think?
been a few years now.
But I think it
since-
probably should be more often with things.
Yes.
Things are changing.
I also asked Ann, we haven't done this for a while either, I asked her to audit all of our handbooks and make sure they're in compliance. She's doing that right now, in compliance with our policies.
Thank you, Ann.
Tom?
Given that these are all the same topic and we have the same rationale, can we vote on them as a block?
You can if you want to.
D through,
J?
No, D through H, because I and J are chapter 33, so I would like to
okay.
separate them.
Sure.
I guess I propose a recommended vote to approve policies AC, ACAA, ACAA-R, ACAB, ACABR, and lastly, JKAA as presented.
I'd separate
No,
that
not
one.
JKA.
Oh,
no, just to H.
nope, sorry, yep, I went too far, sorry. Knew that wasn't right.
Second.
Any discussion or questions here?
So do these all replace ACA, which caused great concern a month or two ago?
We don't have a.
No, we
ACA
don't have
policy.
policy ACA, that was a draft policy that was brought for first read. This isn't replacing anything. These are all current policies with those names. They're just being updated.
Yeah, they're edits to the existing ones.
Okay,
We don't currently have an ACA on the books.
Yeah.
There's no ACA.
right, I understand. I do have some questions. Can you elaborate on familial status, and then I can imagine what this means, but just go into the examples of that, and then genetic information in there, what does that mean? In the second, AC, second paragraph.
My understanding would be that no one can be discriminated against for however they're for their genetics and then familial status would be regarding who either their parents or caregivers or whatever their family composition is. Is that correct?
That is, and it was recommended that, by Drummond and Woodson, that we add that language to all of our policies.
Yep.
Those two pieces were added by statute, and so Drummond and Woodson
Yep.
recommended that we add those two pieces to all of our policies. as
Gender
we did.
identity was
Yeah.
also added by
Yep.
statute.
I think the legislature passed that in update to the Maine Human Rights Act, either in 2019 or 2020, and so we're just coming into compliance with that.
All of these recommendations come directly from Drummond Woodsum to bring us up to date, legally speaking.
Correct. Yes.
Avery?
Yeah, there's certain things I'd like to see, like, for example, on the harassment and sexual harassment of students, ACAA. I'd like it to have an aspect that gives students, like, the right to, like, it's, like, you know, students don't have to go out of their way to know it. It becomes part of the curriculum, like knowing certain policies and certain rights that students have. Like, for example, in Boy Scouts, when they restructured that with the YPT, they made part of certain rank requirements knowing the YPT rules. Like, you can't have a one-on-one adult and child. You can't have certain things. And I feel like, as a student, I'm entitled to know this stuff without having to attend a board meeting.
I agree with you, Avery, and that's one of the reasons I asked Drummond Woodson to audit our handbooks, because that's what, I mean, it's not a physical handbook anymore, it's e-handbook, but that's what students look at more than they look at I mean, if they're interested, they're not going to look at a policy book. Right. The handbook also is a place where the school is supposed to highlight certain things for students at the beginning of the year, so we're going to be working on that as well. But the first step was to make sure our handbooks are current and should have everything in them, such as these kind of, is this a policy that all of our students should know? Getting that advice now from legal counsel to make sure we've got all of that in there. But I hear what you're saying. Even if it's not legal counsel recommending, are there certain policies that you as a student should know about and not have to search for?
Yeah, I mean, no one really reads the handbook either. I have, because I'm that type of kid, but it's 37 pages long,
right.
of very dense information, and kids aren't reading it.
Yeah, and I think, that raises another question. Are there certain policies that should be gone over, for example, at high school level in advisory at the beginning of the year so that all students are hearing it, or at a class meeting? And I think those are the things we're trying to iron out now with getting the handbooks, making sure that they're where they should be, and how are we communicating. Because there are certain things that we can just put out as communication, and there's certain things we should be communicating.
Yeah.
And differentiating the two.
Avery, I appreciate your comment on that, because I've had a parent reach out to me that has expressed the same interest, just making sure that kids know about communications with adults and all of that stuff. And I think that there's always room to make sure that everybody understands that. So
Right.
awesome feedback.
Just to triple or whatever, they completely agree with that. The staff have collective bargaining units, so the association, the multiple associations of the bus drivers and so on and so forth, the teachers and such, they have them who can then update them on changes to policy. Our students don't have anything like that. Mm-hmm. And so we should be proactively thinking about this. So thank you for bringing that up.
Oh yeah, no problem.
Avery, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'd love to hear more of your thinking about this if you have a chance to think more about it. Maybe you and Madison can talk and think about, what is a way that we could, clearly or more clearly articulate some of these policies to students that are interested in learning more about them, but have them in a way that, all students have access to them. And, you're right, they're not going to go to a policy manual online or in paper and read this stuff. Is there another way we can do this?
Yeah,
Make sure that there's some.
I think it'd be great to have some sort of workshop where we, get together, and then me and Madison, because I know we're both very passionate about, students' rights, the policies, and everything surrounding that. I think it'd be great to sit down, go through the weeds of it all, and just, fix what we find.
So if you both wouldn't mind doing that.
Not
and
at all.
then maybe Mr. Gray and I could meet with you after that, and then we can go from there.
Perfect.
Love to hear your ideas. Okay, I think that's a good point.
Awesome. Any other discussion before we vote? Jason.
Specifically, the one that I've heard grumblings about is gender identity. So can you talk specifically about kind of what that means? And the concern, I guess, is ambiguity around that topic. So is there a process when a person, identifies as changing sex? What does that look like? And how do the kids around them then know that information? Because my concern, I guess, is like pronouns. So somebody transitions to the opposite gender and wants to be identified that way, then what happens when somebody doesn't use the right pronouns, that sort of thing? Does that come under?
Well, I don't know if this is something that is within this conversation.
Well, I don't know when to have it.
We can also, I think there's a lot of information in our district and resources that we could have if the board is interested in more information on just that topic. But in a very general sense, when a student is making a decision and is transitioning to another gender, we try to honor the preference at school if they have a preferred pronoun, preferred name. However, on educational records, it is up to the parent if they're under 18. You know, at the end of the day, what pronoun and name will be on educational records. But in terms of preference used at school during the day, a student can, you know, say, this is my preference, and this is the pronoun I want used. And we've, you know, our staff we've done a little bit of training in this area for staff to make sure they understand. Generally have had a fairly good response from students and staff on this topic.
I also just want to make a mention that we do have a policy JB that's transgender student guidelines. That might be something to review when you're hearing that feedback and getting some of those questions, because there is a policy that speaks directly towards some of that.
And so does misplaced pronouns come under the category of
There isn't a
harassment?
specific mention of what happens if and when, but
It's more awareness. You know, at the high school, there is some awareness. And Avery, you probably can be more specific than I can, but you know, Mr. Scott's been involved in that and helping Mrs. Perkinson, the civil rights team, just awareness around pronouns and their correct usage.
Yeah, I think that, you know, someone changing their gender is kind of, it's a process they go through. It's something that's very personal. And I think people respect that, you know, unless, you know, you're a bully, essentially. You're not going out of your way to call someone by pronouns that, you know, they don't prefer. You know, sometimes people do slip up, say, you know, he instead of they, or she instead of him, something like that. But it's all taken very, you know, people don't take offense to it. It's all, you know, and I don't think it has to be that way. Or I don't think it has to be this way of like the death penalty for calling someone, you know, by the wrong pronouns. I think it's a very personal thing, and that's the way it is in the high school.
And we also, as part of this, so the process for if there's a complaint, that's ACAA-R. And so it spells out exactly the process of what happens, what defines what harassment is, and how you go through the procedure of addressing it.
Thank you, Mike.
So I understand this is bringing things up to state standards. Does this include basically the ability and rights of, say, a trans girl to then go into the girls' bathroom with biological girls? Would that come
So
under this?
that is also outlined in policy JB.
And I can say just practice in our district is that it's all very individualized. And our administrators have done an amazing job. I have to give them huge credit. Working with students, working with families to make sure that whatever plan, it's comfortable for the student, it's comfortable all around, and it's very discreet. Some students who are transitioning prefer to use a staff bathroom, for example, away from students. Others prefer to use a student bathroom, and there's some education around that. I can't say it's one way, it's never the same way. It's always very discreet, and it's always very individualized. And all the times I can think of that we've gone through this recently with students who are transitioning and trying to figure out a plan, and it's always been very careful, very careful.
Does this force the population as a whole to declare their gender?
No. No. For example, pronoun pins, and I'm kind of speaking more than I probably know at this moment. I know those were made available to students, but they're made available in a couple locations in the school. Students could choose if they wanted to take one or not. And if they wanted one, that's great. If they didn't need to take one. And so no one has to declare anything, and people can make that choice. It's totally their decision. And that's how we've kind of approached this whole topic. And I think that's the most comfortable way for everyone.
Just the same too as that if someone has a change in their gender identity, it doesn't mean that even anything about their appearance has to change. You know, I mean, it isn't this thing that if someone decides that they feel more in line with the opposite gender, that they have to pursue anything different than what they're already doing. It's all about just, you know, making sure we're providing respect, and in this case, also following state statute.
Yeah, and there is, in the policy, it does talk about consistency. So there's some consistency with that. So it's not every day there's a change. And there's some reasoning behind that as well in the policy. But
So what Ann just said, though, basically, somebody could change their appearance 0 and go from male to female without
correct.
anybody around them knowing and...
That's their personal choice.
Yeah.
And I think we're getting a little outside
Yeah.
of the
Can
conversation.
I move
around
the
our
question?
policies. Yeah, that's kind of what I was hoping for.
I will say, if there's interest in the topic from the board,
Yeah.
we can have more information for the board on this, and if that's of interest.
I'm always willing to talk more about this if there's more time outside of this policy review. So if anybody from the board would like to create time for that, I'm more than happy to talk. So, all in favor of Ann's motion? I'm sorry, it was a complicated one. Come on. All in favor? Okay, and those opposed? And those abstain?
Was there
No.
opposition?
Just abstain.
Almost done. Then the next two policies that were coming for a second read, JKAA and JKAAR, were both related to Chapter 33 changes. So I recommend to vote that we approve policy JKAA and policy JKAAR as presented.
Second.
Any discussion or questions?
I assume Julie and council have reviewed that.
Absolutely.
Julie was involved with all of these discussions.
Good, okay. All in favor? Great, thank you.
And lastly, the changes in IKF were twofold. One was increasing the age where a district follows IEP students to 22. Previously, it was 20. And then also, when we had revised this policy, July of 2020, we made an error when calculating the credits for graduation, reflecting the changes in guidance. So I recommend that we approve policy IKF, graduation requirements, as presented.
Second.
Any discussion or questions?
Can I say a super quick thing? Is Jeff, can you have someone look over the handbook because it's not quite right with in line with this, with the numbers
Yeah. I think that was, we figured that out, Don Gray, Jim Hand, and I figured that out after everything got published. We're like, oh no.
Yeah, so
Okay.
a revamp on that, and then a little side note on if the senior project needs to be included with that graduation requirement in the handbook.
Okay, I'll
It's
ask
not
Don.
It's not noted anywhere, and I think that that volunteer work, I think, would be suited, expressed somewhere
Okay.
for the high school.
Yeah, we're trying to push the senior projects more
Please.
and make it universal anyway,
And
so.
to see how required it is, I don't really know, so, thank you, Jeff.
Yep.
Okay, all in favor? Thank you. And was that it for policy? Thank you so much. I know that was a ton of work, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, moving on, looking for a motion to appoint professional positions. Thank you. Would anyone like to make a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussions?
Sorry, who was the motion and second?
I did.
Jennifer
And then Vanessa.
And I just want to, I'll just mention that these two positions are new positions in the district, and they are new, replacing vacant ed tech positions that we've not been able to fill. And Julie Olson, myself talked about it and felt that, and with Don Gray, at the high school and felt this was a good use of our resources, and this would be a permanent solution as well. Our numbers, caseload numbers at the high school for FLS have been increasing steadily over the last couple of years, and having a new program, a second program at the high school made a lot of sense, especially with the age 22 now requirement. We have students staying with us now longer, some students staying with us longer. And then the resource room position, again, that's a programming change. So instead of having ed techs working with students, which are vacant right now, those positions, we're now having a teacher who is working with those students. And we feel like we can program the same way with those changes. So I think these are going to be permanent. These will be permanent changes. And we're really happy that we're able to find, at this time of the year, two very strong candidates for both positions. So I'm very happy that.
Will we be moving forward in any of the other schools to switch ed techs with permanent teachers in special ed too, to just as another way to possibly help with our staffing shortages?
There's a third position that is in the works right now that we're looking at, taking 2 vacant ed tech positions, and it's not completed, but we are looking at another position.
Any further question or discussion? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Okay, next up is an approval for an agreement with Oak Point Associations. There was an agreement in our board packet. Looking for a motion.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Questions or discussion on this?
These are the same numbers we saw like 2-3 weeks ago, right?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, so the 245,000 you might remember, and then there was 5,000, I can't remember if it's called supplementals or resources. But yes, it's the same number that you saw 2 weeks ago.
Okay, all in favor? Thank you. And then looking for a motion to enter executive session.
How about the GGG plan first?
Did you want to raise a motion?
Sure. Move to, I'm going to split it up again, though.
This is on you.
But we also have to approve the plan as well, right?
Just
There were no changes to
the updates. So there were updates that were recommended on the recommended update page. So those are the only things that you're really approving are those updates.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have to do that anyways, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
So go ahead.
Yep, and I apologize that that was not on the agenda. It should have been.
Right.
Do you want to do a motion for that?
No, I interrupted Jason. You can go for it.
So I'm going to
just
break it
saying
up into 2 parts. I'll move to vote on the portion for masking the high school kids only, grades 9 through 12, and to change the verbiage to be from mandated to recommended.
Okay, do we have a second for that motion?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Any discussion or questions? Okay, all in favor? And those opposed? And those abstained?
And I'll move to accept the remainder of the GGG plan as laid out by Jeff.
Second.
Any discussion or questions? Thank you.
Just not the remainder, but approve the plan as recommended?
Changes.
I just heard remainder. I thought that was.
Oh.
Well, no, because then you're forcing me to accept the part that I don't like, so.
Does someone else want to make a motion?
Move to accept the updated Greely Goes Green plan.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion or questions? And all in favor? And those opposed? And abstained.
You had a motion on the table that you ignored procedurally, I believe, right? I made a motion, she seconded it.
Oh, we didn't table it.
And then we didn't do anything with that.
I'm sorry, which one? There's been a lot. Sorry, if I'm not.
Just the remainder, the motion that I made for the remainder of the GGG plan.
So I think, my motion.
I don't think it got seconded.
It didn't second.
Didn't get seconded? All right, my bad.
Okay. So are there any other motions that would like to be brought to the table this evening? Okay.
And please feel free to scour the minutes, because I think I got it right, but who knows? I'm taking notes.
So we're looking for a vote to enter executive session.
Go ahead.
I vote to enter executive session to discuss negotiations between MSAD 51 Education Association bus drivers and MSAD 51 Board of Directors pursuant to state statute MRSA 4056D.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you.
Do we have to go outside or just like go there?
Oh, I think we have to go.